The story opens with our protagonist Alec peacefully fishing without bait. Then, out of nowhere, a mysterious stranger approaches and asks if he'd like to learn the art of magic. Their lessons begin immediately, and before long, Alec succeeds in conjuring fire. However, aiming and controlling it as a projectile remains difficult, so his mentor Eldaz instructs him on how to properly focus. Eldaz instructs him to imagine the sensation of striking his target, and also tells him to picture the friends he'll have one day. Sooner or later, those companions will find themselves in danger, and Alec will need to step in and protect them with his magic. That idea works wonders since Alec strongly desires to shield the ones he loves, so Eldaz tells him to hold on to that feeling while inhaling deeply. At last, Eldaz tells him to open his eyes and let the spell fly, and Alec successfully launches 2 fireballs. Overjoyed, Alec grins ear to ear, and Eldaz commends him for the progress. Alec admits that today's spell was particularly hard since it took most of the day to master, but Eldaz reminds him that ordinary people need an entire month to reach the same level. Alec is pumped to learn a new technique, but Eldaz decides not to push him too far, knowing it could weaken the overall training. To cool off, Eldaz suggests they wind down with more fishing. Alec complains, saying he finds fishing boring and can only think about learning more magic. Trying to ground his eager student, Eldaz tells Alec that he's a gifted mage by nature. Even without someone guiding him, he believes Alec will grow into an exceptional mage. Like the river that flows without resistance, Eldaz tells him to let destiny guide the rest. That leaves Alec wondering why Eldaz chose to teach him in the first place. Eldaz seems unsure how to answer, but before he has to, he's saved by catching a fish. And despite being a brilliant magic instructor, Eldaz is hilariously bad at fishing, so Alec steps in to help reel it in. The moment lightens the mood, and they share a laugh before calling it a day. By the following morning, Alec returns to his training. The new magic formula is tougher than the last, but Eldaz encourages him, saying he's more than capable. The days go by with Alec learning a fresh spell each and every day. Still, it's not all study and effort. One day, the two find themselves in a snowy showdown thanks to magic-fueled snowballs. But the peaceful days aren't meant to last forever, and eventually, Eldaz reveals that he'll soon be leaving the capital. Alec feels crushed by the news, knowing this means they'll likely never meet again, and Eldaz clearly feels the same. But even now, Eldaz still has advice to give. He warns Alec that if the opportunity ever comes to join the Imperial Court as a magician, he should turn it down. Alec doesn't understand the reason, but what he truly wants to know is why Eldaz taught him magic in the first place. Eldaz hesitates, emotion showing on his face, but he manages a gentle smile and says it was because Alec's mother helped him long ago, back when she was still alive. Those end up being Eldaz's final words to his student, leaving Alec silent and shaken. Years pass, and Alec, now a grown man, is attending the Royal Academy of Magic. He never forgot the teacher who changed his life, and in his search for answers, he discovers that Eldaz once graduated at the top of his class. He did become a court mage, but for reasons unknown, he was later exiled. Alec realizes now that this is likely the source of the sadness that always lingered in Eldaz's eyes. With this in mind, Alec makes a bold decision. He sets his sights on reforming the structure of the Imperial Court. To repay the debt he owes Eldaz, Alec swears to make a difference, and that begins by becoming a court magician himself. Time skips forward, and Alec has achieved his goal. He's now serving as a court mage, but that changes quickly as Prince Regulus announces Alec's dismissal. Regulus questions whether Alec even understands his own duties. Alec replies that his role is to assist the prince using his magic, but Regulus clearly has something else in mind. He presses further, asking if Alec fulfilled that role during their last mission, but Alec has no answer. The prince explains that he is a warrior, leads from the front because that's his role, and their shield bearer Ix blocks attacks without hesitation because that's his role, and their mage Lini uses flame spells to push back monsters because that's her role. But Alec, by contrast, has only ever used buffs and defense spells. Regulus says that's not enough. Not for someone carrying the title of court magician. He questions whether Alec only holds the position in name. Alec admits that he's stuck to support magic so far, but insists there's a valid reason for it. Regulus isn't interested in hearing his side. He interrupts and tells Alec to just admit that all he knows is basic support magic. Then he calls him pitiful for pretending he's more than that, and the others jump in as well. Lini mocks him, saying he's always warning the team not to go too deep into the dungeon, when really in her eyes, he's just scared. Alec is stunned by the words coming from his former teammates, but Leni tells him that she was simply keeping quiet until now. It was the king who placed Alec in their group, but they've reached the breaking point. None of them are willing to hold back anymore, and they're tired of dragging someone like Alec along while tackling dangerous dungeons. Regulus says he'd heard Alec was top of his class at the academy, but it's obvious now that he's incapable of doing anything unless someone else steps in to help. Alec begs them to let him explain, but Regulus catches sight of something tucked at Alec's side. It's a dagger, and that alone sets the prince off. He snatches the weapon from Alec and reminds him that he gave a direct order forbidding commoners from carrying arms. Alec tries to explain that he brought it for the next floor of the dungeon because they'll need it, but Regulus has no interest in hearing excuses. He declares that no one on his squad is allowed to take independent action, and he says that this is exactly why he opposed bringing a commoner into his party in the first place, and he regrets not fighting harder against it. Regulus then grabs Alec by the shoulders, tears the official robe off his back, and tells him he doesn't deserve to wear it. He's done arguing, and all Regulus says now is that their team has no place for someone like Alec, so he orders him to leave, and Alec stands there frozen. Later that night, Alec buries himself in study, determined to learn everything he can about the dungeon. He uses magic to flip through multiple books at once, reviewing floor layouts and magical data with precise focus. He compiles a full breakdown of the threats awaiting on the 30th level, and concludes that Regulus's team doesn't have the magical capacity to make it through. His conclusion is based on monster strength, terrain difficulty, and the known failure rates from previous attempts. With their current group setup, Alec is convinced they won't make it out alive. Alec wishes things had turned out differently, and he genuinely tried to be of help, but in the end, he just couldn't earn the prince's trust. Just as he's about to give up, Alec realizes there's still one option left. He knows Regulus won't hear him out, so he decides to approach the king himself. But when he reaches the castle, he's turned away at the gate because he's no longer a court magician, and ordinary citizens aren't allowed inside without official approval. Still, Alec refuses to leave and insists that he carries information too important to ignore. Right at that moment, Leni shows up to remind Alec that he's been dismissed. She sneers that he's no longer a court magician, just another ordinary commoner. She says she's heard plenty of tales about his supposed brilliance back at the Magic Academy, but seeing him now, she figures those stories must have been lies. One rumor even claimed Alec broke records in the capital's dungeon. Until then, no one had gotten past the 30th floor, but allegedly Alec reached the 68th. Leni always doubted that story, and now she feels validated. Alec doesn't respond to her jabs and chooses to stay silent because he still has something urgent to deliver to the king. He reminds her that it was the king himself who assigned him to Regulus's team, and that must mean the king trusted him. The message he carries is meant to protect the prince, and Alec believes the king would listen if he just had the chance to pass it on. Leni returns, seemingly to accept the letter, only to shred it into pieces right in front of him. She says she's done entertaining a commoner's words, then orders the guards to toss his sorry ass out. Later, Alec reflects on how it's been 4 years since graduation, and he tells himself he really did try his hardest as a court magician. Still, he feels the weight of failure and knows he owes Eldas an apology. In the end, he couldn't reform the imperial court like he promised. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out, and Alec turns to see Yorha, an old friend from the past. It's been 4 years since they last met, but she can tell right away that something's wrong. Alec apologizes for the gloomy mood, and Yorha vents her frustration about the kingdom of Galdana. She says she's sick of how this place clings to outdated ideals about noble blood and social class, and how discrimination still thrives because of that shit. Though she's clearly upset about what he went through, she also admits she's a little glad it happened. She reminds him of what she once said in the past, that one day she'd get him to join her team, and that's exactly why she came to the capital. Now's her chance, so Yorha asks if he'd like to dive back into dungeons, but this time with his old crew. She tells him she genuinely needs his strength, and that she'd be happy to have him by her side again. Alec is taken aback because it's a complete reversal compared to the way Regulus's group treated him. Once a court mage cast out for being dead weight, Alec has been carrying the weight of failure and doubt. But thankfully, Yorha pays no mind to any of that. She sees through his self-doubt and reminds him he's far more than who he believes he is. She tells him she doesn't need anyone else, only him. Her words hit deeper than she realizes, and then she reveals something more. Her party made a pact. One day, they'd all come back for him. She doesn't want to pressure him if he has other plans, but her sincerity has already reached him. Alec agrees to rejoin, and Yorha welcomes him back to their A-rank squad. Later on the cart, Alec dreams of a conversation from the past when Eldas warned him not to become part of the court. Yorha asks him if he's okay, and Alec just replies that his old mentor had been right about something after all. Back at the palace, Regulus receives word that Alec has left the kingdom and returned to the life of an adventurer, and the group mocks their former companion. The academy once called Alec its most brilliant student, and Regulus had been eager to see how impressive he really was. But after fighting beside him, Regulus concluded he was nothing but a spineless disappointment. Leni says she's just relieved they won't have to deal with that useless commoner again. Alec's replacement is already lined up, the brilliant son of a noble house named Vogan, and as a true noble, he'll contribute far more than Alec ever could. And with Vogan now on the team, Leni says they'll tear through the dungeon faster than anyone has before. She boasts that Regulus's name will echo across the world, and they all burst into maniacal laughter. Meanwhile, our protagonist arrives in the dungeon city known as Fizzle. Yorha loves it here because unlike the kingdom, Faisal doesn't carry the same old bias and class restrictions, so it's been her party's home base for years. But before they can venture into any dungeon, Alec has to officially register as an adventurer. That part is easy enough, but a new obstacle appears. In Faisal, no adventurer is allowed past floor 30 of any dungeon without a special permit, and that pass is only granted after 2 years of being a guild member. And since Alec just signed up, he doesn't qualify, which means for now they'll have to wait 2 years. The two decide to rest for a bit, and during their break, Yora explains that her team has already made it down to the 52nd floor of their current dungeon. She wants Alec to be part of that progress, but waiting 2 whole years isn't an option. Instead of fixating on what they can't do, Yora chooses to focus on what they can. She reminds Alec that lower dungeon levels don't require any passes, and that there should be plenty of places for them to practice. After all, they're adventurers, and in a city built around dungeons, they've got no shortage of opportunities. Soon after, the two are locked in combat on the 2nd floor of one such dungeon. Yora casts a strengthening spell on Alec, and he quickly cuts down several of the giant wasps surrounding them. But suddenly, Yora feels uneasy. She had planned for this outing to be an easy warm-up, yet something feels off. She blinks, thinking her eyes might be deceiving her, as the swarm around them multiplies at a shocking rate. But Alec confirms it's no illusion. The insects are furious, and from their behavior, he concludes that their nest has been disturbed. Yorha then conjures a magical barrier to draw the swarm's attention, but Alec urges her not to push ahead. She surprises him, saying she's got this under control. Normally, Alec could handle monsters like these on his own, but Yorha can tell he isn't performing at his best. She knows his potential, yet something seems to be weighing him down, and that's why she tells him to let her handle it for now. It might be tough, but she says helping a comrade in need is exactly what teammates are for. Her words cut deep, stirring something inside Alec. He reminds himself that he's no longer a court magician, he's an adventurer now. Just like Eldas once taught him, he repeats to himself that real magic is meant to protect what's precious. Alec clenches his fists and decides he won't hold back any longer. He unleashes an offensive spell, sending bursts of energy that tear through the surrounding wasps. More of the monsters rush in, but Yorha feels stronger this time. With the real Alec fighting by her side, she raises a shield for him to work behind, just like the old days. Alec chants again, and bolts of lightning crash down from above, obliterating every last wasp in the swarm. Yorha cheers in victory, but her joy fades fast as the ground splits open, and a massive berserk worm bursts out. Alec instantly understands why the swarm had gone wild, but there's no time to dwell on it. The creature lunges, wrapping around Yorha, but Alec already has a plan forming. He knows the spell he needs, though he hesitates. One wrong move could hurt her. He calls out to Yorha, reminding her that she had mastered the finest defensive barrier spells back at the academy. They've always fought in perfect sync, so Yorha immediately catches on to what he's thinking. She fires back with a grin, reminding him that he was once the student with the strongest offensive magic in the entire school. With their trust aligned, Alec unleashes his full power. He chants the name of his attack Sacrifice Blaze and releases a torrent of searing flame that engulfs the monstrous worm. Yorha braces behind her barrier as the firestorm consumes their foe, and when the smoke clears, the two stand triumphant amid the ashes. Alec tells her that he always had faith in her, and Yorha smiles, saying he's still the most powerful mage she's ever known. The scene then shifts to a memory from their academy days. Their party is locked in combat with a raging dragon, one fierce enough to wield 5 elemental powers in succession. The fight turns grim, and Yorha is nearly spent after shielding the team from the creature's relentless barrage. Just as the beast prepares to finish them, Alec steps in and obliterates the dragon with a single strike. That moment would go down in history, the day Alec's team conquered floor 68 of the Royal Dungeon, proving that the legendary story was true. Their group erupted in celebration, swearing that they'd stay together no matter what came next. We then cut back to the moment right before graduation, when Alec was part of an elite group of students admired throughout the academy. The team consisted of Ornest, the gifted warrior, Krazia, the sharp-minded healer mage, Yorha, the expert in support magic, and Alec himself, the academy's strongest attack mage. On the day of their graduation, the 4 had just shattered the academy's long-standing dungeon record, making it all the way to the 68th floor, securing top honors and fame across the entire academy. But as they were walking back together, chatting about their future goals, Alec suddenly came to a stop and told them that he wasn't planning to continue with them because he decided to become a court mage instead. His teammates were visibly let down, especially Ornest, who had hoped that with Alec on board, they could form the strongest adventurer team the world had ever seen. Still, he respected Alec's choice, knowing he must have had his reasons. But before they parted ways, Yorha made one thing clear, that she wasn't giving up, and the moment Alec became available again, she'd be there, waiting to bring him into her party. That brings us back to the present, where Yorha happily welcomes Alec to the team. To celebrate, she treats him to a warm meal, but it turns out she doesn't handle alcohol very well, because after a single mug of beer, she's already slurring and barely upright. Within moments, she's out cold, slumped in her seat, so Alec places his jacket over her so she doesn't catch a chill. That's when a man suddenly appears behind him, commenting that Alec seems unusually thoughtful for an adventurer. Assuming he's just a random drunk causing trouble, Alec chooses to ignore him and turns away, but the man doesn't like being brushed off, and he angrily swings his bottle at Alec. The glass shatters, but Alec had already activated a barrier spell, blocking the attack with ease. He prepares to respond, but the man surprises him by calling him by name and saying he lives up to the rumors, then sliding a dungeon permit across the table. He tells Alec to treat it as an apology for such a rude test. Alec, still a bit irritated, now feels more confused than anything. He has no idea who this man is, until Yura, still groggy from her drunken state, suddenly sits up and asks what the guild master is doing here. Alec freezes in place, realizing the man is none other than the guild master himself. The guild master then calmly tells him that he'd like to see what the former court magician is truly capable of, and invites him to come to the training grounds for a demonstration. Soon, they arrived at the guild's testing chamber, where the man finally introduces himself properly as Leviel stands. Alec immediately recalls hearing tales of Leviel's past, and he was once a member of an elite S-rank adventuring team, so Alec knows this fight won't be easy. Still, he's thrilled because he sees this as the perfect opportunity to sharpen his edge before stepping into a real dungeon. As soon as the match starts, Alec opens with a thunderbolt, but Leviel swiftly dodges and retaliates with a slicing water slash. Alec quickly realizes that ranged magic won't work well in this fight, and he'll have to go in close if he wants to stand a chance in this duel. But before he can get close, Leviel activates body enhancement spells, dramatically boosting his speed and strength. He moves so fast that Alec struggles just to follow him with his eyes, and when Leviel finally attacks, Alec manages to throw up a barrier just in time, but even with the shield, the impact sends him crashing into the wall. Yura flinches in concern, but Alec soon gets back on his feet, assuring everyone he's alright. He admits the speed caught him by surprise, but now that he's experienced it once, he starts thinking of ways to react to it. Then a grin forms on his face because he remembers that back when he served the prince, he was forbidden from taking initiative in combat. But now as an adventurer, he has no such restraints, so he's not just limited to dodging and support spells anymore. Channeling his magic into his staff, Alec reshapes it into a glowing blade and charges straight at Leviel. In response, Leviel fires off another water slash, but Alec slices through it with ease, closing the distance. Leviel's impressed, but he doubts Alec will be able to do the same once he starts throwing punches. He strengthens his body even further and darts toward Alec again, but this time Alec is ready. Just as Leviel gets into striking range, he triggers a hidden thunderbolt spell that explodes right in his face, stunning him long enough for Alec to land a direct strike with Magic Blade. Leviel stumbles back, genuinely surprised that Alec managed to break through his defense. He finally understands why Yorha always speaks so highly of him, but the test is far from over. With a smirk, Leviel activates the ancient artifact in his possession, and then massive glowing gauntlets form around both his arms, and one swing from them slams into the floor and leaves a freaking crater behind. Alec instantly understands that taking even one hit from those gauntlets would be catastrophic, so he knows he has to tread carefully. Still, he refuses to back down and casts another thunderbolt spell, but this time the effect barely slows Leviel at all. The artifact Leviel activated has a secondary effect. It gradually regenerates his wounds. That means the longer this fight drags on, the slimmer Alec's chances of winning become. Realizing he has to stop Leviel from healing, Alec keeps up the pressure, launching rapid strikes. But none of his hits are landing because Leviel's speed and movement are too precise. Frustrated, Alec taunts him, asking if he's too afraid to face him head-on. The jab works and Leviel swings back hard, losing his precision and exposing himself just long enough for Alec to slash him across the stomach. It's the opening Alec was hoping for, so he's finally landed a solid hit, but he knows it'll take far more than that to defeat Leviel. Leviel charges in again, and Alec throws up a barrier, but the punch blasts through it, shattering the shield completely. Even so, the impact slows Leviel down just enough for Alec to drive a spell-boosted strike into his chest. Leviel is not willing to lose, so he slams his fists down with a devastating hammer blow, kicking up a giant cloud of dust that covers the field. Yorha starts to worry that Leviel is going too far for what's supposed to be a test, because that last hit looked like it should have knocked Alec out. But then Alec appears behind Leviel and lands one final blow before his wand breaks and he collapses. Yorha runs to check on him, and Leviel admits he may have pushed things too far, and he declares Alec the winner. As Yorha starts treating Alec's wounds, Ornis shows up after getting tired of waiting, and is shocked to learn that Alec had just fought Leviel. He tells Leviel it was a bit much to use his strongest weapon in a sparring match, but Leviel says that things got intense, and he lost himself mid-fight. Now that he's seen Alec fight, Leviel is sure he's ready to enter the dungeon and hands over the dungeon pass. The test didn't go how anyone expected, but Ornest still congratulates Alec for passing. Since Alec is still unconscious, they carry him back and let him rest on a couch. By now, everyone knows what Alec went through as a court mage, and the fact that he lasted as long as he did is nothing short of incredible. The palace was packed with snobs who couldn't stand the sight of a commoner in their ranks, so Alec must have fought with everything he had just to hold his ground for this long. Right then, the receptionist bursts into the room, urgently calling for the guild master with some bad news. Liviel quickly tells the group he has to take care of something and asks them to stay behind and look after Alec while he's gone. Before leaving, he warns them not to go anywhere near his alcohol stash, especially not to touch the rare bottles. The moment Liviel steps out, Ornest casually strolls over to the liquor shelf and grabs the most extravagant-looking bottle he can find, grinning to himself, just to mess with Liviel later. Then, turning serious, he asks Yorha to tell him the full story behind Alec's time as a court mage. Up to this point, he's only heard vague bits and rumors, and what he hears stuns him. Alec's job was to serve as the prince's personal protector, but he was banned from carrying a sword or using any magic that could outshine the prince. He was even ordered to carry supplies and manage the inventory during their travels. And the worst part was that after being forced to rely entirely on support spells, the prince had the nerve to call him useless for not using attack magic. That last detail throws Ornest off, and he always thought Alec specialized in offensive magic. Yorha confirms that's true. Alec specifically went out of his way to learn support spells just to stay on the prince's good side, even though it didn't suit him. Hearing all that, Ornest is furious. The mistreatment Alec endured is far worse than he expected, and the second Alec starts to stir awake, Ornest doesn't hold back, and he tells him they should forget about the dungeon for now and go teach that spoiled prince a lesson he won't forget. But Alec, still groggy, calmly tells Ornest to let it go. He admits it still bothers him, but not to the point of seeking revenge. Ornest offers to go beat the guy up for him, but Alec chuckles and puts a hand on his shoulder. He says there's no need because he's just happy to finally be free, doing what he loves with people he trusts. That's all that matters now. Besides, with no one left to cover up the prince's failures, the sweet karma is bound to catch up with him soon. That gives Ornest an idea, and he tells Alec they should focus on becoming the greatest adventuring party the world's ever seen. And once the rumors reach the capital, the prince will realize what he threw away. And when that day comes, Alec will be able to look him straight in the face and tell him off however he likes. Alec admits he likes the sound of that, and they fist bump, vowing that together, they'll become the strongest party out there. At the same time, in another part of the guild, a badly injured adventurer from an S-rank party is being patched up while reporting to the guild master about her latest mission. Her name is Krista, and the mission had gone completely off the rails. Everything fell apart, and her teammates are still trapped deep inside the dungeon. So she pleads with Liviel to assemble a team to rescue them. Liviel immediately calls for an emergency meeting, but with such short notice, the only adventurers available are the ones already present at the guild. He informs the gathered group that they'll be forming a rescue squad to retrieve the rest of Krista's party, currently stranded on the 64th floor of the dungeon. Tension fills the room as everyone exchanges uneasy glances because they all know how risky that floor is. While the meeting is in full swing, Alec is still sitting alone back in Liviel's office. That's where Krasia finds him, surprised to see him by himself. She greets him warmly and asks how he's holding up, but judging by the bruises and cuts all over his body, the answer is obvious. She asks why he isn't in the meeting, and Alec quietly says he didn't want to intrude. Everyone else attending is A-rank, and he still doesn't feel like he belongs among them. Without saying a word, Krasia raises her hand and casts a healing spell, restoring Alec's injuries. Then she looks at him and gently reminds him that no one in this guild sees him as an outsider. While he worked at the royal court, Alec had gotten used to blending into the background, never speaking up, never standing out for fear of offending arrogant nobles. And even now, he struggles to shake off those habits, even if things are different here. Krasia sees the weight he's carrying, so she reaches out and softly pats his head, telling him she's always around if he needs someone to talk to. And the gesture lifts his spirits more than he expected. Moments later, Ornest and Yorha return. Ornest looks fired up as he tells Alec they've just been handed the perfect opportunity to explore the dungeon. He fills him in on the rescue mission and adds that the area they're heading to is nicknamed the Tank Killer. And the reason is that healing magic is completely nullified inside. The only way to recover is with potions, which means survival is much harder. Alec is surprised Krasia agreed to a mission like this, considering how much she relies on healing spells. But she admits she's not exactly thrilled about it. In fact, she hates everything about that place. She only gave in because Ornest wouldn't stop insisting that it'd be the perfect first mission for the new team. Alec starts to doubt whether he's even strong enough to help, but Yorha shuts that down immediately. She tells him that he's the key to the entire operation. His magic is what their strategy depends on, and without him, they wouldn't stand a chance. The group soon heads toward the dungeon, and as they stop in front of its towering gate, Ornest steps forward with his usual swagger, declaring that this is where their legend begins. Then they begin mapping out their next moves. This particular dungeon is wrapped in a rare magical aura that completely disables healing spells. That means no recovery magic once they're inside, so only potions and raw agility will keep them alive against whatever comes their way. Their objective lies far below, close to the 64th floor, where members of Krista's guild are currently trapped. But getting there won't be simple, so they'll have to carve their way through every floor before it, including all the boss fights guarding each level. Ornest quickly assesses the situation and notes that if they go floor by floor, they'll arrive far too late. That's when Yora pulls out a gleaming magic crystal, revealing that Krista had given it to them in advance. And with this item, they can bypass all previous levels and teleport straight to level 64. Alec instantly recognizes that this must be an exceptionally rare and powerful artifact, so Yora says that Krista didn't hesitate to hand them out because her only priority is rescuing her teammates, no matter the cost. Yora then adds that the level 64 boss is reportedly an undead, which unfortunately renders Krasia's light-based healing magic ineffective. And since Yora herself is a support mage, the bulk of the fight will rest on Alec's shoulders. Ornest then tells Alec to conserve as much mana as possible, offering to handle the lesser enemies so Alec doesn't burn through his energy before reaching the real threat. Krasia agrees, urging the group to brace themselves, warning that from this point on, they'll be battling death itself. Even a seasoned S-rank party was completely wiped out in this place. Instead of being intimidated, Ornest grins with wild energy, more alive than ever. He rallies the group, shouting that this is where the tale of their legendary party truly begins. With that, Yora tosses the crystal high into the air. As it shatters, it activates, instantly teleporting them deep into the dungeon, right to level 64. The group materializes in a dim, musty cavern, and within moments, a wave of undead skeletons begins to rise, armed with swords and shields. But Ornest doesn't hesitate for a second, and he draws his spear and charges head-on, striking the first wave with ruthless precision. With each thrust and sweep, he dismantles groups of undead effortlessly, boasting that level 64 seems laughably easy so far. The rest of the team stays back for a moment, quietly observing, as more skeletons crawl out from the shadows and begin advancing. Ornest, unfazed, continues his rampage, slashing down anything that moves. But Yora quickly becomes concerned because he's moved too far away from her area of effect, so she breaks into a sprint, calling out for him to return to formation. Alec and Krasia follow closely, both muttering that Ornest will probably be fine. After all, he's armed with a legendary artifact, the piercing black spear. It's nearly indestructible, always razor-sharp, and extremely effective in battle, so it's a perfect weapon for someone who fights with guts instead of brains. Alec calls out to Ornest, asking if he needs a hand, but Ornest confidently replies that this is child's play for him and continues demolishing every enemy that dares to come near. Alec chuckles and keeps walking alongside Krasia when all of a sudden he senses something unusual behind him. Trusting his instincts, he fires off a lightning bolt over his shoulder. As the smoke clears, there's nothing in sight. Even Krasia looks puzzled, asking what that was about. Alec admits he thought someone was behind him, but maybe it was just a false alarm. Still uneasy, he draws his sword and dashes forward, slashing the air in front of him. His blade clashes with something invisible, which suddenly reveals itself as the Grim Reaper. Ornest grins and comments that Alec's not as out of shape as he assumed, adding that he sensed the invisible enemy earlier but couldn't deal with it himself. The Grim Reaper retaliates, pushing Alec back with a strike, but Alec quickly recovers, deflects the blow, and retreats toward Ornest. At that moment, Alec understands that Ornest was placing complete trust in him, counting on him to handle threats from behind without needing to look back. It's a feeling Alec hasn't experienced in years, true camaraderie, and that realization ignites a surge of strength within him. He leaps into the air, brandishing his enchanted sword, and delivers a clean, powerful strike that cuts through the Grim Reaper, slaying it instantly. He then turns toward Yora and asks if she had known about it too. She immediately apologizes for keeping it quiet, while Krasia jokingly tells him to blame Ornest, since it was his idea in the first place. Alec smirks and tells Ornest he owes him one, to which Ornest replies that they'll talk about favors after they actually make it out of this dungeon alive. The four teammates now regroup, side by side, ready to take on whatever comes next. Soon after, both Alec and Ornest launch themselves into the swarm of undead, slicing and tearing through skeletons in every direction, while Yora provides magical reinforcement from the rear. Ornest is in his element, pulling off flashing maneuvers and eliminating every skeleton in his path. Meanwhile, Krasia calmly supports him from a distance, taking down sneaky enemies with her deadly accurate bow shots whenever they try to flank him. Yora, though typically in the backline, is forced to defend herself up close with her staff as the endless wave of skeletons pours in. Realizing the horde isn't slowing down, Alec calls the others back, shouting that he'll take care of the rest in one strike. Without hesitation, the party quickly gathers behind him, so Alec channels his power and unleashes a massive thunderbolt, engulfing the entire area in blinding electricity, making every last skeleton reduced to smoldering ash. Once they're in the clear, Ornus turns to Alec and casually asks why he's only been using his Thunderbolt skill, since back at the academy he used to wield several types of offensive magic. Alec quickly brushes it off and just says that Thunderbolt is the fastest spell to cast, so it's just more efficient in battle. Ornus raises an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but chooses not to push the issue as there's no time to dig deeper because they're on a mission. Suddenly, a monstrous roar echoes from the depths ahead, and they all instinctively assume it must be coming from the boss room. Ornus doesn't hesitate because the moment Yura casts reinforcement magic, he blasts forward like a flash, running faster than Speed himself. Alec watches in surprise, impressed by both Ornus' explosive speed and Yura's magic boost. He and the girls waste no time and quickly follow Ornus through the tunnel toward the source of the noise. As they emerge into a wide-open chamber, they spot Ornus perched casually on a rocky ledge, arms folded, observing a chaotic scene unfold below as a massive monster is chasing a panicked adventurer in every direction. Alec immediately prepares to help the poor guy, but Ornus doesn't move, muttering that the frantic mage down there is named Loki, a notorious troublemaker from a party called Recroma. Krasia nods in agreement, adding that Loki might be obnoxious, but he's also a clever support mage. Alec, however, struggles to process what he's hearing, especially as Loki flails around, screaming up at Ornus to do something and swearing he'll haunt him every day if he dies here. Ornus, unfazed by the threats, just watches with a bored expression. But the situation looks grim because Loki suddenly trips and crashes to the ground, with the monster bearing down on him fast. Alec instinctively gets ready to intervene, but Krasia tells him to wait, explaining that this is all part of Loki's usual strategy. Alec hesitates, watching as the towering monster approaches Loki, but then in a flash, a trap spell beneath the creature ignites, blasting it with molten lava. Alec's eyes widen in shock, but Krasia simply smirks, repeating that Loki is nothing if not crafty. The beast staggers backward, only to trigger another trap, setting off a chain of fiery explosions. Loki jumps to his feet and starts taunting the creature, laughing mockingly and boasting that only a fool would trip in a trap-filled zone like this. But his arrogance quickly backfires as the monster roars in rage and charges up a devastating magical blast aimed directly at him. Loki's bravado fades in an instant as he realizes that death is seconds away, so he closes his eyes, bracing for the end, but is saved at the very last moment by none other than Ornus, and Loki can't believe he's still breathing. Then, as Alec and the girls make their descent to join the battle, the monster redirects its fury, launching an attack straight at Alec. But Yorha reacts in time, casting a protective shield that blocks the strike. Alec prepared to counter with another thunder magic, but before he could unleash it, the beast twisted around and charged straight for Ornus and Loki instead. Alec shouts a warning to Ornus and Loki, alerting them to the incoming danger, and fires off another thunderbolt spell that strikes the monster dead on. However, as the dust settles, he quickly realizes the attack wasn't powerful enough to bring it down. Ornus notices the creature rapidly closing in on him, so he resorts to a desperate maneuver, charging straight at the beast and slipping between its legs in a swift motion. He then hurls Loki toward Krasia, who tumbles to the ground beside him. Yura promptly instructs Krasia to take Loki to the ledge while they handle the monster. Ornus swiftly assumes position, drawing his spear in preparation for the next clash. They wait until Krasia secures Loki's safety, then brace themselves for the final confrontation. Yura casts a powerful enhancement spell, boosting all of Ornus' stats, prompting him to charge the creature head-on. He skillfully evades its strike, leaps into the air, and drives his spear toward its face. Yet the monster proves far more resilient than expected, violently shaking him off and flinging him to the ground. Yorha races to aid the fallen Ornus, but the monster attempts to crush him instantly. Fortunately, she casts her shield spell just in time to block the blow, giving Ornus a brief moment to recover. Meanwhile, Alec appears almost theatrical, conducting an unseen symphony as he summons 5 glowing magic circles around the monster. Loki observes in disbelief, remarking that even generating 3 circles is incredibly difficult. For Alec to conjure 5 simultaneously, he must be a prodigy, but Krasia calmly replies that Alec is capable of far more. To Loki's astonishment, Alec proceeds to summon 20 magical circles at once. Then, as the monster lunges forward, Ornus climbs up its body and strikes its tail, buying Alec the precious seconds needed to complete his spell. Ornus then leaps away just as Alec finishes his incantation and unleashes a devastating barrage of thunderbolt magic that electrocutes the beast, freezing it mid-motion. But when Alec moves in to deliver the final blow, the creature unexpectedly sidesteps, narrowly evading the attack. The monster immediately begins charging its own magical blast, but Krasia quickly casts a blinding spell, momentarily disorienting it. At the same time, Yura uses her magic to summon enormous glowing chains that bind the monster tightly in place. Taking full advantage of the moment, Ornus hurls his spear like a javelin, landing a direct hit through the creature's skull as Alec prepares to finish it for good. But to everyone's surprise, the monster still manages to move and immediately begins casting its devastating magical blast once more. Alec, however, remains calm and unmoved, preparing to unleash a spell so rare that only 2 people in the world even know it. One is his mentor Eldas, the very mage who created it, and the other is Alec himself, who learned it directly under his guidance. As the creature hurls its charged blast toward Alec, he counters it with reflection magic, sending the attack back with twice the force. But the Dame monster is incredibly resilient and somehow survives even that. Now barely hanging on, the beast attempts the same spell again, but this time Alec combines his reflection magic with multiple layered magic circles, engulfing the monster in a brutal inferno. The beast is incinerated where it stands, and Ornest follows up by slicing its head clean in half, bringing the battle to an end. With the fight over, the group begins to celebrate their hard-won victory, but their moment is cut short when Loki steps forward, thanking Alec for his help and revealing that he knows who he is, specifically, that Alec is the court magician. Alec casually replies that he's no longer with the royal court, to which Loki responds that it's the prince and his party's loss. He then drops a bombshell. The monster they just defeated wasn't even the floor boss. It was merely one of the sub-bosses that had foolishly chased after him and ended up separated from the rest. This revelation stuns Alec and the others, who now question how powerful the real boss must be if even a sub-boss pushed them to their limits. Loki then reveals that the true floor boss is a necromancer clad in pitch-black armor, masquerading as a knight. He warns that regular physical attacks don't do much damage and are mostly useful for stalling. Turning toward Alec, Loki presents him with a magical wand topped with a silver cross. Alec instantly recognizes the relic as Loki reveals it to be a long-lost ancient artifact. As soon as Alec grips it, the wand transforms into a gleaming sword in his hand. Ornest is skeptical and questions Loki's motive for giving away something so valuable. Loki just chuckles and admits he plans to use Alec as bait on the front lines. The entire group stares at him in disbelief, unsure if he's joking. But Loki explains that Alec, with his frail appearance, would look like an easy target. By placing him at the vanguard, they could lure the boss in, catch it off guard, and then spring a coordinated ambush, securing victory and earning the glory of slaying an S-ranked boss. At the same time, the prince and his team find themselves fleeing through the depths of another dungeon by 2 enormous caterpillars. The prince is completely thrown off by the situation, unable to grasp how things have spiraled so far out of control, especially given that he's never had any trouble handling these types of creatures in the past. Without hesitation, he orders Lini to destroy them using magic. She makes the attempt, but for reasons she can't explain, her spells simply refuse to activate. Irritated, the prince lashes out, calling her useless and insisting that he'll take care of the threat personally. However, the moment he swings his blade, it bounces harmlessly off the monster's hide, and it's in that exact moment he starts to realize that something is very wrong, and he takes a hit. Lini and Ix quickly pull the prince up from the ground after he's knocked down and make a run for the dungeon exit. During their retreat, the prince racks his brain, trying to make sense of what went wrong. His attacks used to carry far more force, and now that he reflects on it, he realizes that his decline in strength began right after he removed Alec from the group. But rather than acknowledging that Alec may have been a valuable asset, the prince convinces himself that Alec must have cursed him out of spite. Once they've made it out of the dungeon, the prince immediately visits one of the royal magicians, Vogan Fornius, to investigate whether he's under the influence of a curse. After conducting a brief magical analysis, Vogan confirms that no such curse exists. The prince is stunned, insisting that he wouldn't have had such trouble clearing the 30th floor unless Alec had sabotaged him. But Vogan, aware of the anti-magic zone present on that floor, calmly explains that the prince likely felt weaker because his support magic was being suppressed. The prince scoffs at the explanation, dismissing support magic as worthless trash that only weaklings like Alec depend on. Vogan does his best to remain professional, even as the prince continues rambling with baseless arrogance. Still, he does find it unusual that Alec hadn't warned the prince about the anti-magic field beforehand, considering Alec is the famed student who once reached the 68th floor. The prince laughs dismissively, telling Vogan that there's no chance someone as pathetic as Alec could have actually accomplished such a feat, and claims it must be just some rumor that commoners circulate among themselves. Vogan doesn't even attempt to argue because there's simply no reasoning with that level of delusion, but at that moment, a royal guard steps into the room and informs the prince that the king wishes to speak with him regarding Alec's situation. The prince grins, confident that his father will support him. However, upon his arrival, the king immediately begins recounting a story about Eldas. He explains that Eldas was once a royal magician who had been exiled years ago, and in the king's words, was a remarkable fool. Eldas, despite being a noble, had the audacity to stand before the king of Galdana and declare that unless the treatment of commoners and court magicians changed, a great tragedy would befall the nation. The prince interrupts, claiming elders deserve to be banished since no nobleman should dare speak to the king in such a bold tone. But the king clarifies that Eldis wasn't called a fool for his words. After being stripped of his noble rank and cast out, Eldis went on to enroll at the Royal Magic Academy. There he silenced his critics with extraordinary talent and graduated as valedictorian. Yet despite gaining fame and prestige, he made the baffling decision to return to the castle and serve once again as a court magician. While in service, he persisted in telling the king that commoners were not beneath them, urging him to change his views, until one day Eldis mysteriously vanished. At the time, the king had dismissed Eldas's warnings, but recently he's begun to reflect on whether the man may have been right. That doubt is precisely why he ordered the prince to explore the dungeon, because he wanted to determine whether nobility truly makes one superior to commoners. And based on the prince's current state, the king admits he may have been mistaken. He states that the time has come to abolish their outdated policy of discrimination, and going forward he intends to hire based on talent, regardless of lineage. The prince is left speechless, shocked by what he's hearing, and insists that such a policy would tarnish the royal family's reputation if commoners were treated as equals. The king calmly acknowledges that he's the one who raised the prince with those beliefs, but times have changed, and so must they. The prince protests, arguing that associating with commoners like Alec only brings disaster, pointing to his own situation as evidence. But before he can continue, a guard steps forward and hands Regulus the remains of a torn note that Alec had written. The king explains that before Alec departed, he had prepared a detailed guide specifically designed to help Regulus navigate the 30th floor of the dungeon, but it was destroyed by Lini before the prince ever had a chance to read it. Regulus is stunned by the revelation, and overwhelmed he quietly tells his father that he's not feeling well and excuses himself from the room. As Regulus exits the chamber, the king turns to Vogan and quietly requests that despite the challenges it may present, he would be grateful if Vogan could support Regulus to the best of his ability. Vogan nods and assures the king that he will do everything in his power. At the same time, Regulus is spiraling into a mental breakdown because if Alec truly possessed remarkable talent and insight all along, then the harsh truth is that he himself may have been the problem, and he simply cannot accept that reality. At the same time, on Alec's side, he is in the midst of asking Loki to explain why he doesn't want him using magic against the upcoming boss. Alec understands that artifacts carry immense power, but this particular boss is supposed to be immune to physical attacks, and he doesn't believe the sword alone will be effective. However, Loki clarifies that he never intended for Alec to actually defeat it with the sword. He just wants Alec to act like a close-range fighter to prevent the boss from anticipating a magical attack. The rest of the group catches on to the strategy, but Krazia remains confused as to why they need to deceive the monster in the first place. Loki then explains that this boss possesses intelligence equal to their own. Alec finds the claim hard to accept, and Loki understands the skepticism. Still, all he asks is for Alec to rely on his blade, at least until he gives the signal, and Alec ultimately agrees to follow the plan. With that settled, Loki turns to Krazia and says there's something he needs her assistance with. It would take too long to reach their allies on foot, so he intends to use teleportation magic. The only issue is that he doesn't currently have enough mana to cast the spell by himself, so he requests her support in completing the ritual. The group immediately panics upon hearing the words teleportation magic, since it's a closely guarded national secret, and even being aware of it could put them at serious risk. But given the circumstances, they decide to take the gamble, while jokingly agreeing that if it all goes wrong, they'll just blame Loki. As Loki begins drawing the teleportation circle and walking Krazia through the process, Alec takes a moment to pull Yorha aside and asks whether Loki is someone he can truly trust. Yorha admits that she personally doesn't care for Loki's attitude, but when it comes to serious matters, he's absolutely dependable. To back that up, she tells Alec that 2 years ago, Loki successfully led a large-scale raid on a high-tier dungeon, and due to his exceptional planning, the entire mission was completed without a single casualty. Hearing this, Alec decides to put his full confidence in Loki's strategy, and once the teleportation circle is finished, the group gathers together inside it. Yorha is in awe, witnessing real teleportation magic for the very first time. However, Loki informs her that this is merely a simplified variant, designed to transport them to a destination of his choosing. On that note, he gives the group a firm warning. They'll be arriving directly in front of the boss, so they need to be battle-ready the moment they arrive. With that, Loki activates the teleportation circle, and in the blink of an eye, they vanish from their location and reappear right in front of the other members of Loki's team, who are currently locked in combat with the Dark Knight. The two allies have done their best to hold the creature off, but despite their efforts, they've inflicted little damage and are now visibly running out of stamina. Luckily, Ornest rushes in just in time to cover their retreat. He engages the knight head-on, drawing its attention, and while the knight focuses on Ornest, Alec tries to land a sneak attack from behind, but the enemy reacts instantly, leaping into the air to avoid the strike. The knight then charges at both Alec and Ornest, while Loki and Krasia move quickly to assist Rywell and Marbell, helping them retreat to safety. The knight's armor is incredibly dense, and from what they can tell, there's no actual body inside it. But that makes no difference to Ornest, because he rushes forward again, striking at the knight. The enemy attempts to jump over him, but Ornest was ready for that and pinned the knight's cape with his spear into the ground, creating a perfect opening for Alec to sever the knight's head. As the heavy steel helmet crashes to the floor, Alec wonders if that was enough to finish it off. But in battles like this, things are never that simple. The knight suddenly begins to stir once more, and grotesque tendrils burst out of its now exposed neck. So it becomes clear that this is an undead headless horseman, and the creature they had slain earlier must have been in its mount. For a brief moment, Alec gets caught up in his thoughts, and by the time he snaps back to reality, the Dullahan is already airborne and descending toward him with a powerful attack. Alec raises his sword in a panic to block the blow, and barely manages to withstand it. The monster is faster and stronger than before, confirming Alec's suspicion that it had been holding back earlier. So from this point forward, the fight is only going to become more intense. But luckily he doesn't have to face it alone. While Alec is holding his ground, Yora is continuously casting buffs on Ornest, and once he's fully charged, Ornest launches himself forward and lands a brutal hit on the knight, giving Alec just enough of an opening to knock the creature back. Alec is stunned by how resilient the knight's armor is because of his weapon weren't a powerful artifact, it which shattered long ago under the pressure of such fierce blows. Even worse, the fact that their opponent is undead means that no matter how many times they manage to knock it down, it will always regenerate and rise again. And speaking of which, the knight suddenly retrieves its severed head and reattaches it to its shoulders before unleashing a deafening shriek that rattles the entire battlefield, leaving everyone momentarily disoriented. Immediately after, it locks onto Alec and delivers a brutal kick with all its force, launching him backward at an alarming speed. Fortunately, just before he slams into the wall, Yora casts a barrier spell that cushions the impact. She rushes over to check on him, and Alec reassures her that he's okay. He just hadn't anticipated the knight having such refined martial prowess, and if not for Yora's quick reaction with the barrier, there's a real chance he wouldn't have survived that blow. With that in mind, he turns to Loki and asks how much longer he has to keep fighting using only the sword. Loki, still in the midst of completing his preparations, tells Alec that he needs to hold out for 5 more minutes. Easier said than done, because Alec almost died a moment ago, and he's down to just 3 potions. Meanwhile, Ornest is struggling to stay on his feet, shouting for Alec to get his ass back into the fight. Together, the two press on, doing their best to keep the knight engaged until Loki's 5-minute countdown is finally up. With his setup complete, Loki activates a massive magic circle and begins laughing, drawing everyone's attention. The display provokes the knight into a panic, so it charges straight at Loki and slashes him across the chest. But that, as it turns out, was all according to plan, because the Loki it struck was nothing more than an illusion, and the grand spell circle was simply a decoy designed to lure the enemy into a carefully laid trap. In that instant, ice begins to crystallize beneath the knight's feet, while the real Loki observes from the top of a nearby tower. At the same time, Ornest triggers a teleportation trap, crafted earlier by Loki and Krasia, that instantly moves him behind the knight, giving him the opportunity to strike and push it forward. Just then, Marbell leaps down from an overhead arch, aiming a heavy downward slash. The knight narrowly dodges the blow, but this too was anticipated. Loki had placed another hidden ice trap that activates on contact, weakening the knight's movement speed with a freezing debuff. Realizing Loki is the mastermind behind the battlefield manipulation, the knight begins scaling the tower to eliminate him directly. Loki draws a magic blade to defend himself, but Rywell is visibly concerned because Loki doesn't have the raw power to stand toe-to-toe with the knight. Although he had Yorha apply a 7-fold strength amplification earlier, the strain on his body is immense, and he's barely holding it together. Still, while Loki holds the knight's attention, Yora prepares and casts a high-tier binding spell to restrain it. The spell succeeds, but not before the knight lands a heavy strike on Loki, knocking him off the edge of the arch and sending him plummeting toward the ground. Yet, even in freefall, Loki remains calm and unfazed, because everything is proceeding exactly as he envisioned. And as he falls, he looks over to Alec, and with a smirk, calls out that the stage has been set, and it's time to bring this battle to an end. And he happily agrees. Alec then begins deploying a sprawling network of magic circles around the knight, and Loki is genuinely impressed because it's even more than what Alec unleashed against the last boss. But after everything he's already been through, Alec's body is starting to give out under the immense pressure of sustaining such complex spellwork. Still, he forces himself to his feet and launches the Thunderbolt acceleration spell, which lands a devastating blow. However, the knight still manages to move and is now starting to break free from the restraint spell that Yora had cast on it. She struggles to hold it in place, but at this rate, the knight will break loose any second, so she yells at Alec to finish it off already. Of course, that's far easier said than done since Alec's body is on the verge of shutting down. and this marks the second time today he's used such a high-level incantation, and the sudden mana loss would have knocked out just about anyone else. Alec is no exception, but he has far more riding on this now, so no matter how badly it hurts, he grits his teeth and powers through, finalizing the casting sequence for one of his ultimate spells. A lightning dragon takes shape, and the instant Alec unleashes it, it tears through the night, vaporizing it on impact and bringing the battle to a close. With the threat finally gone, Alec drops to the ground from pure exhaustion and mutters a joke about how having dependable teammates really makes a difference when your life's on the line. Yora walks over and corrects him, saying it was more like they were the ones relying on him the whole time because they never would stood a chance without him. Ornis just seems relieved that Alec is back to being his usual unstoppable self. And on a lighter note, he brings up the bet from earlier, and Alec remembers that right before the fight, Ornis declared that whoever passed out first had to take on a dare. Technically, Alec just lost that bet a moment ago, but since it happened after the battle ended, Ornis decides to go easy on him. He says the only dare is this. Alec's not allowed to keep things bottled up anymore. If something's weighing on him, whether it's Ornis, Yorha, or Krazia, he's got to talk to at least one of them so they can help. And Alec smiles and agrees without hesitation. Rywell then approaches to express his gratitude to Alec and the others for their assistance. Marbell wants to thank him as well, though her approach is a bit more forward, and she plants a kiss on his cheek, which visibly horrifies Yorha. Marbell then asks if Alec would be interested in teaming up for a dungeon raid sometime, but Yorha quickly steps in and firmly declares that Alec is their party's mage, so Marbell can't just claim him for herself. And since the Rechroma team owes Alec a huge debt, Rywell as the leader offers to write him a formal recommendation. Alec seems puzzled at first by the mention of a recommendation, so the others fill him in that to be promoted to S-rank, an adventurer must receive an endorsement from an S-rank party as well as approval from the guildmaster. Getting the guildmaster on board shouldn't be too difficult, so Rywell assures Alec he'll take care of everything on that end. Once the conversation wraps up, Alec retrieves the knight's magic stone, officially wrapping up the Rechroma rescue mission with a perfect result. Then upon returning to the guild, the receptionist warmly congratulates Alec on the successful outcome, and tells him he's become quite the topic of conversation lately. She then asks if he managed to get any rest after the intense battle, but Alec replies that he's feeling great. With that, she hands him his reward, and Alec gets ready to head out. But just before he can leave, Leviel stops him and informs him that he has a visitor from the kingdom of Galdana waiting. This catches Alec off guard since he no longer has any ties to the kingdom, but he agrees to hear the visitor out and discovers that it's Vogan. Of all the people Alec dealt with back at the royal castle, Vogan was one of the more reasonable ones, so Alec gives him a respectful bow and says it's good to see him again. But before they can exchange pleasantries, Vogan immediately confronts him and asks if Alec was seriously trying to get Prince Regulus killed by not warning him how unprepared he was for dungeon combat. Alec responds calmly, asking Vogan whether he truly believes Regulus would listen to anything he said, even if he had given him a warning. Vogan pauses, then realizes Alec's probably right. Still, he's clearly annoyed that he got stuck with this miserable assignment after Alec was dismissed, so he considers it a complete waste of his time and skills. Alec asks if that means Vogan was chosen as Regulus' new party mage, but Vogan replies that calling himself a magician at this point feels like a joke, so he's more of a glorified babysitter than anything else. After Alec's departure, Regulus attempted to tackle the 30th floor of the dungeon solo, and ended up suffering serious injuries as a result. Vogan had hoped the incident would serve as a teaching moment, giving Regulus a chance to reflect and grow. Instead, the prince refused to accept any blame and demanded that Vogan accompany him here so he could confront Alec face to face. Alec asks if that means Regulus is currently in the city, and Vogan confirms it, explaining that he's down in the underground training arena at this very moment. Alec hadn't expected to cross paths with Regulus again so soon, but he realizes this might be the perfect chance to finally close the book on their unfinished business. So even though Alec would be entirely justified in ignoring Regulus altogether, he decides to go meet him in person and put an end to it properly. As they descend the stairs, Vogan comments that the only thing Regulus has going for him is his stubborn pride, but personally he doesn't understand why the nobility always insist on proving themselves superior to commoners, because to him it all seems like a pointless waste of time. Alec reminds Vogan that he's technically a noble as well, but titles have never meant much to him, and all he's ever wanted is to live life on his own terms. When they reach the arena, they find Regulus already waiting at the center. To Alec's surprise, the first thing Regulus brings up is that the king intends to change how the kingdom is governed. While Regulus personally disagrees with this shift, he says he'll comply out of respect for his father's wishes. Hearing this gives Alec a sliver of hope that maybe Regulus has finally started to come around. But that hope is short-lived, and Regulus quickly adds that regardless of politics, he still can't stomach the idea of taking orders or even advice from someone he views as beneath him. Alec tells him that if he had just listened back then, he wouldn't be in the mess he's in now. But it's clear Regulus still refuses to hear reason, and Alec knows there's no point wasting breath on someone so willfully blind. Regulus has spent all 15 years of his life being told that he's inherently better than commoners, so the idea that he might be the one in the wrong simply doesn't compute. Desperate to prove that everything he's ever believed isn't a lie, he draws his weapons and challenges Alec to a duel, asking Vogan to serve as an official witness to their fight. Without warning, Regulus charges at Alec, forcing him to block with his wand. But Alec is caught off guard to find that Regulus has swapped his usual longsword for a pair of daggers. A few years back, when Regulus was first selecting his weapon, Alec had recommended that he use daggers instead of a longsword, pointing out that his body was still too small to wield something so heavy effectively. But Regulus had instantly dismissed Alec's advice without giving it a second thought. But ironically, he's now following that very advice. Still, just changing weapons didn't suddenly make him a skilled fighter, and Alec easily sidesteps one of his attacks, causing Regulus to stumble forward and slam face first into the ground. Alec suspects that Vogan probably played a role in setting this whole encounter up, so he asks what he said to provoke the prince. Vogan simply told Regulus that if he truly wanted to challenge Alec's strength, he'd have to prove it in combat. At the end of the day, it was Regulus's decision to show up and issue the challenge, and Alec has to give him some credit because despite everything, the prince didn't resort to cheap tricks. He came here looking for a clean, honorable fight. Regulus's daggers are artifacts, so they carry a good amount of power behind them. During one of their direct clashes, he even manages to break through Alec's shield, but that's about all he can pull off. He had clearly been training hard with those daggers in preparation for this moment, and in doing so, he finally realized that the real reason he ever made progress in the dungeon was because of Alec's support magic. After Alec was dismissed, Regulus kept attempting to clear the 30th floor of the dungeon on his own, but every time, he'd come back beaten and bloodied, unable to understand why. Eventually, he sat down and read through the recovered pages of Alec's original report, and what made his blood boil was that everything Alec had written turned out to be right. If he had just followed that guidance from the start, he wouldn't have failed so miserably, and even just reading it made him realize how insanely gifted Alec really was, which only made it harder to come to terms with the way he had treated him. So now Regulus demands that Alec activate his artifact and face him for real. Alec asks if Regulus is really sure about going through with this, knowing full well the gap in power between them, but Regulus stands firm and refuses to back down. Still, before they fight, Alec has one question he needs answered and asks if it is actually true that the king intends to reform the way the royal court operates. Regulus confirms it, adding that his father had apparently been testing the strength and resolve of the lower classes, which is why he sent both Regulus and Alec into the dungeon. If that's the case, then it explains why the king always treated Alec with such unexpected kindness. And this revelation is without a doubt the best thing Alec has heard all day, because now, those 4 years he spent serving as a court magician don't feel like a complete waste after all. But as for Regulus, he warns Alec to brace himself because he won't be holding anything back. He draws his artifact and charges forward, fully prepared to face the consequences. Regulus is shaking in his boots, knowing full well he's about to get the crap beaten out of him, but still he stands his ground, ready for whatever's coming. Yet at the very last moment, instead of striking Regulus, Alec shifts his aim and slams his attack into the ground. Regulus demands an explanation, asking why Alec chose to let him off the hook. He reminds him of every insult, every time he ignored him, mocked him, and acted like he was worthless for no reason at all. He built his whole self-image around the belief that being a noble made him better than everyone else. But if that was a lie, then what's left of who he is? He came here thinking that dying by Alec's hand would at least let him hold on to some shred of dignity. But now, Alec's looking at him with pity, and Regulus is completely lost, and he doesn't know what to believe anymore. Alec typically isn't one to laugh at someone else's misery, but even he can't help chuckling at how ridiculous this has all become. He walked in expecting a bitter grudge match, figured Regulus would be shouting threats and throwing punches. But instead, the guy's breaking down and asking for life guidance. The absurdity of the moment makes it impossible to stay angry, and suddenly Alec realizes how pointless all that resentment was in the first place. Once he sees that Alec isn't mad anymore, Regulus lowers his head and sincerely apologizes for how he treated him in the past. And Alec is honestly stunned because he never thought Regulus had it in him to swallow his pride and admit fault. Still, he understands that Regulus acted the way he did because of how he was raised. That doesn't excuse it, but if Regulus is willing to change, then Alec figures it's worth letting go, so without hesitation he offers his hand. Regulus reaches out, about to accept it, but at the last second he pulls back, still feeling a bit too embarrassed to follow through, and he wants to hang on to a little bit of pride. Instead, he pulls out Alec's old court magician cloak and apologizes for taking it from him that day. He tells Alec he can have it back if he wants, and he also presents a letter from the king himself, stating that there's an open seat at the royal court waiting for Alec, should he ever choose to return. Alec raises an eyebrow and asks if the king is ordering him to come back. but Vogan assures him that it's not a command, just a request. Alec nods, then says he doesn't need the cloak or the letter, because he's perfectly content with his current party and has no intention of ever leaving them behind again. Regulus accepts his answer without complaint, but insists Alec take the cloak anyway because it belongs to him. Then he tells Vogan they're done here and it's time to leave, because there's nothing more to say. But as he walks away, there's the faintest smile tugging at his lips, and it's clear that both he and Alec have finally made peace with their past. The next day, Alec catches up with the group and casually asks if anyone's got time to hang out. Krasia, Yorha, and Ornest all say they're free and ask what he's thinking, so Alec admits he was hoping they could show him more of Faisal because he's still getting his bearings and wouldn't mind a proper tour. Under normal circumstances, all three would be happy to help out, but the second Ornest and Krasia realize what's happening. They both spot this golden opportunity to give Yorha some alone time with Alec. So without wasting any second, they each toss out some clearly fake excuse and duck out, leaving Alec with no choice but to spend the day with Yorha one-on-one. Alec doesn't pick up on how suspicious their exit is, and Yorha just laughs it off, even though she knows full well they just handed her a gift on a silver platter. That said, she almost screws it up right away by asking Alec if he wants to push the date to another day, but he says he's totally fine with it being just the two of them. Hearing that gets Yorha a little hyped, so she jumps up and says she's gonna give him the full Faisal experience. A bit later, the two are strolling through the city as Yorha explains that Fizzle's an adventure-heavy town, so it's common to find weapons, armor, and all kinds of gear sold everywhere. But she warns him not to trust everything he sees, since some merchants are shady and love tricking people with useless junk. But that'd be great advice if she wasn't currently getting conned herself. Alec watches, half amused as Yorha's already fallen for some sketchy pitch. A merchant is trying to sell her a drug that supposedly gives you the stamina to fight for days without sleep, and that shit made Yorha want to buy it badly. But Alec can feel the bad energy radiating off that thing just by looking at it, so he grabs Yorha's hand and tells her to come with him. He figures it'd be smarter to let Krasia and Ornest handle the shopping instead since Yorha gets easily distracted. She admits she does get duped here and there, but reminds him that the last time she asked those two to shop, Ornest came back looking like Zorro, and Krasia bought an oversized teddy bear, so trusting them isn't exactly a winning move either. With that in mind, Alec says he'll take over the party's shopping from now on, and Yorha tells him that would honestly make her life way easier. As they continue walking, Alec notices a cozy-looking cafe and suggests they take a break, so the two of them go inside to relax over some tea. While they're sitting and chatting, Alec brings up how Ornest and Krasia seem to really dislike Loki, and asks Yorha what that was all about. Yorha tells him it's kind of a long story, then explains that 2 years ago, they ran into an A-rank party that was struggling in a dungeon, so they stopped to lend a hand. Not long after, Loki and Rewell showed up too, and they all teamed up to take down the floor boss together. But during the fight, Ornest got injured while shielding one of the A-rank adventurers by taking a blast of acidic spit straight to the back. He tried to act tough afterward, pretending he was fine, but his legs gave out on the way home, so Loki and Rewell had to carry him back. Up to that point, Loki had treated Ornest decently, but while Ornest was knocked out, his spear kept smacking Loki in the head, and eventually Loki lost his patience and chucked it into the forest, gone for good. Yorha doesn't think Loki meant any harm by it. In fact, he probably assumed it wasn't a big deal, since the spear was already in bad shape. But to Ornest, that spear meant a lot, and when he woke up and learned what happened, he was seriously pissed off. Still, he might have let it go if Loki had just apologized, since it was clearly a dumb mistake, but Loki genuinely couldn't understand why Ornest was so upset over a beat-up weapon. Ever since then, the two haven't been able to see eye to eye, and Yorha admits it's kind of ridiculous that a busted spear is what started the whole feud. Alec agrees, but that still leaves the question of why Krasia doesn't like Loki either. Yorha laughs and says Krasia doesn't actually have a real reason, she just doesn't vibe with the guy. A little later, Alec and Yorha are walking through town again when she starts reminiscing about all the time they used to spend shopping together back in Galdana. They pool their gold to buy healing items, and she even remembers how Krasia once tried to brew her own potions, but every single attempt turned into a disaster. As they keep walking, Yorha suddenly stops in her tracks. Her eyes lock on an elven ribbon hanging in one of the market stalls, and she's stunned. These rare accessories boost the wearer's magic power, and she's been searching forever for one. But the price tag is steep 50,000 gil, and she doesn't have anywhere near that much on her right now. She's clearly upset, knowing someone else will probably snatch it up before the day's over. And seeing how much it means to her, Alec decides on the spot to buy it for her. Yorha looks at him, a bit unsure, and asks if he's really okay dropping that kind of cash on her. But Alec tells her it's for the good of the team. Her magic plays a huge role in keeping their coordination tight. Plus, he's sitting on a mountain of savings from his days as a court magician, and honestly, he wanted to treat her to something nice. Yorha beams and tells him she'll treasure the gift with all her heart, and Alec's happy to hear that. The two of them spend the rest of the day enjoying the city together, checking out different spots and soaking in the atmosphere. As the sun begins to set, they end their outing by heading up to the top of the clock tower to watch the view. Yora turns to Alec and asks what he thinks of Faisal, and he says he loves the energy here because the way everyone's so full of life and free-spirited makes him feel like a real adventurer for once. After hearing that, Yora gets a little more serious and asks Alec if being in her party is truly what he wants. She brought him in right after he got exiled from the royal capital, and she can't help but feel like she took advantage of his situation, like she pressured him into joining when he didn't have any other options. She tells him that if he ever wants to leave, she won't hold him back, but Alec cuts her off and says sure, there were a few things he had planned back in Galdana before leaving, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters now is chasing the goal Ornus threw out there, becoming the strongest party in the world, and he knows there's no way he can reach that without Yora and the others by his side, so he's not going anywhere. That answer puts Yora at ease, and she's especially glad to hear it because it's rare for Alec to speak so openly. He's usually the kind of guy who keeps everything bottled up. Alec says he just felt like it was time she knew how he really felt. And actually, there's one more thing he needs to tell her. Yora starts blushing, thinking this might be the moment he confesses his feelings, and she even starts leaning in, expecting a kiss. But Alec suddenly chuckles and says the only reason he's being so open is because he lost a bet to Ornus, and part of that deal was that he's not allowed to hide what he's thinking anymore. Yora instantly realizes Alec still has no clue how she feels about him, and it leaves her totally flustered. She had really hoped he'd finally make a move, but he's not. Frustrated, she turns away, trying to hide her embarrassment, while Alec just stands there confused, completely unaware of why she suddenly looks so upset. The following day, Ornus heads over to wake Alec and finds him completely knocked out in bed, surrounded by a pile of books. He tries the usual way, calling Alec's name, but when that fails, he just yanks the covers off and shouts for him to get the hell up. Ornus reminds him that a proper adventurer is up at the crack of dawn, ready to go. Alec gets it sure, but he still doesn't understand how Ornus has this much energy first thing in the morning. Once Alec is dressed and ready, the two of them step out into the backyard to start their morning training session. They go at full force, and Yorha, watching from the side, warns them to dial it back before one of them ends up getting seriously hurt. Of course, the warning goes completely ignored, and if anything, it just fires them up more. Both guys are hell-bent on proving they've got the edge, and the clash only gets more intense. It finally wraps up when Alec's sword shatters mid-strike against Ornus' defense. Ornus technically wins, but still calls Alec a damn monster for being able to keep up that well while being a mage. Either way, he's not done yet. He says it's time to crank things up and tells Alec to summon his artifact so they can keep going. But before Alec can do anything, Yorha jumps between them and puts a stop to it, saying if they push this any further, someone's definitely going to get wrecked for real. Right at that moment, Loki decides to make an entrance. Seeing them all training hard, he smugly steps in and offers to give them a few tips. After all, he is an S-rank adventurer. But nobody's interested, so the whole group just turns to leave and get on with their day. That's when Loki suddenly flashes their S-rank ID and asks if they really want to treat him like this when he's the one who recommended their party for S-rank promotion. As soon as he says that, Yorha immediately spins around and gets hyped, asking to see the card. She's clearly thrilled about the promotion, but Loki says he won't hand it over unless Ornus apologizes for all the times he treated him like crap. Ornus flat out refuses, and just as the tension starts building, Krista and Rewell arrive and step in, telling Loki to quit making trouble for Yorha's team. They go on to explain that the recommendation for Yorha's party to be promoted to S-rank has already been submitted and approved by the guild master, so they're only here to deliver their brand new S-rank ID. Everyone's riding high from the promotion, but then Krista walks up to Alec and tells him she doesn't think becoming S-rank is nearly enough to repay everything he's done for their party, so she tells him straight up that if he ever finds himself in trouble, he'd better not hesitate to call on her, and Alec genuinely appreciates it and says he'll keep that in mind. And to celebrate the fact that Lasting Period officially made it to S-rank, Loki suggests they all go out for lunch, so Kreja quickly announces that Loki is inviting everyone to eat on his tab. And immediately, the group heads over to the tavern for a well-deserved feast. Even while they're eating, Alex still can't fully wrap his head around the fact that he's part of an S-rank party now, but Ornus catches the look on his face and immediately calls him out, warning him not to start doubting himself. He then tells Alec this is just the beginning of their legacy, and if he starts getting stuck on stupid insecurities, Ornus won't hesitate to beat some sense into him. Alec says he gets it, and with that, Yorha lifts her glass and proposes a toast to their new S-rank status. They even go as far as ordering a whole barrel of the tavern's most expensive booze, much to the dismay of Loki's wallet. Hours later, night has settled in and everyone's full and tired, ready to head back home. Except for Yorha, who's completely knocked out after drinking way too much. Kreja explains that she was just in an especially good mood tonight, not only because of the promotion, but also because Alec turned down the king's offer to return to Galdana so he could stay with their party instead. Right then, Nisha comes running up looking for Krazia, saying the guild is short on healers and they could really use her help. Krazia doesn't hesitate and heads straight to the guild infirmary to assist, but when she gets there, she's surprised by how many wounded adventurers are packed in. She turns to Misha and asks if a dungeon raid went south or something, but Misha shakes her head because monsters didn't cause these injuries, they were caused by people. That stuns Krazia because it's the first she's heard of anything like that. So Misha explains that there's been a string of attacks recently, adventurers getting ambushed by a dangerous group that calls itself the Shadow Guild. Right then, the guild master steps in and calls out to Krazia because he's got another injured adventurer who needs immediate help. The infirmary's packed, so Liviel had no choice but to bring her upstairs to his own quarters. The girl's name is Olivia, and she's in critical condition after being ambushed alone by the Shadow Guild. Her wounds are severe, but with Krazia on the scene, Liviel's confident she'll pull through. Krazia starts examining Olivia's injuries, carefully checking each one, but just as she's about to start healing, Olivia suddenly jolts awake and grabs her hand. She demands to know where she is, so Krazia calmly explains that she was brought to the guild for emergency treatment after being attacked. She then gently asks if Olivia remembers anything about the Shadow Guild that might help. But the moment she hears that name, Olivia erupts in rage. The memories of what happened come flooding back, and with clenched teeth, she swears revenge for what he did to her. She begs Krazia to heal her immediately so she can get back out there and fight, but Krazia stands firm and says no because if Olivia tries to jump back into battle right after getting healed, it'll only make things worse. Frustrated and still burning with anger, Olivia tries to push through the pain and force Krazia to heal her faster. But as Krazia warned, the effort causes her to collapse again, and once she's out cold, Krazia resumes the healing process. Turns out, Olivia is part of the Nameless Party, one of Faisal's top-ranked swordsmen, which only raises the question, who the hell could have done this kind of damage to someone that strong? And by the time the sun rises, Krazia has finished healing her. Completely drained, she slumps forward and dozes off at Olivia's bedside. Elsewhere in Faisal, Alec is buried in research at the library, flipping through everything he can find on the arcane dungeon. Out of nowhere, a boy named Lorg walks up and introduces himself as a member of Nameless, the same S-rank party Olivia belongs to, and he asks Alec if he'd be willing to join him on a raid into the labyrinth. Not long after, Krazia heads over to Olivia's room to check in on her, only to walk in and catch her mid-swing with a sword, despite the fact that she's supposed to be resting. Liviel is just sitting nearby, watching it happen, so Krazia shoots him a look and asks why he didn't stop her, but he just shrugs, saying it's pointless because Olivia won't listen to a damn thing he says. And when she shuts down like this, there's nothing he can do, and on top of that, she's not even telling him what happened with the Shadow Guild, which is stalling his entire investigation. Krazia steps in, grabs Olivia, and tells her she should be lying down. But Olivia fires back, shouting that the real issue isn't rest. It's the fact that her legs still aren't working right. She snaps at Krazia, yelling that if she's really a healer, she should start acting like one. Even though Olivia's being completely out of line, Krazia doesn't take it personally. Instead, she calmly asks Liviel to step outside so she can start treatment. Once he's gone, she begins channeling healing magic into Olivia's legs, and Olivia is taken aback that she's not grilling her with questions. Deep down, Krazia can already tell Olivia was betrayed by someone close to her, and if Olivia doesn't want to talk about it, she's not going to push. What matters now is getting Olivia back on her feet, and Krazia is here to help however she can. That simple kindness hits Olivia hard, and it dawns on her that Krazia's done nothing but try to help this whole time, and all she's done is lash out. Guilt wells up inside her, so she drops to her knees and apologizes, saying she was wrong to treat Krazia like that. It wasn't Krazia's fault, and she was just venting her own failure and pain at the wrong person, so she promises to make it up to her. Krazia smiles, happy to see the change in her, but she doesn't want Olivia beating herself up, so she leans forward and gives her a gentle kiss on the forehead. Olivia recoils in shock, asking what that was for, and Krazia chuckles. It's just a little charm to help her relax. That simple gesture reminds Olivia of her mother, and for a moment, her expression softens as she drifts into thought. Krazia notices and asks what's on her mind, but Olivia shakes it off and changes the subject, asking if she can have something to drink. Krazia nods and offers to make her some tea. She brings over a cup for Olivia, and just as she's about to pour herself one too, Olivia speaks up again. She says she just remembered she hasn't eaten anything since the day before and admits she's starting to feel a bit hungry. Krazia says no problem and offers to go grab some food for her. But as soon as she steps out of the room, Olivia reaches over and quietly slips something into Krazia's teacup. Back at the house, Alec links up with Yura and Ornest to fill them in on his meeting with Lord and the dungeon raid he proposed. Ornest heard the name before, and he figures Alec must have been caught off guard by the guy's appearance, but truth is, Lord's way older than all of them put together. Alec's jaw practically hits the floor, but Yura chimes in, explaining that Lurg's actually an elf, and for some reason, he just likes playing the whole cutesy act, even though he's pushing 100. As for the dungeon raid, Ornest's curiosity is piqued, so he asks if Alec got any actual details. Alec tells him that Luorg said the plan is to hit the 72nd floor and clear it fast, and he even went as far as offering Alec the dungeon core when it's all said and done. Alec was stunned that Luorg would just hand over the chance to clear the final floor, especially considering Nameless had been grinding their way through it for months. Sensing Alec's hesitation, Luorg explained that his team has some unfinished business with the Shadow Guild. Apparently, they messed with one of his teammates, and now he's heading out for payback. That means he won't be able to finish the dungeon himself, so he's hoping Alec's group can take over while he's dealing with the guild. Yora thinks the whole deal sounds great, but Ornest flips out and calls the whole thing shady as hell. He says Nameless giving up their dungeon rights is one thing, but taking on the Shadow Guild too. That's just way too convenient. Alec admits it does sound sketchy, but Yora pushes back, saying she doesn't think Luorg would screw them over like that. He's strange, sure, but he's the reason his party still runs smoothly, so she doubts he'd scheme against them. Anyway, standing around won't get them any closer to the truth, so Ornest grabs the core and says that the rude girl Krazia was patching up yesterday. Turns out she's from Nameless, so if they want to know if Luorg's telling the truth, they should just go ask her. The others are on board, so they make their way toward the guild. But right before they reach the entrance, Misha comes bursting out and crashes into them. They quickly ask what's going on, and Misha, out of breath, tells them something awful's happened to Krazia, which is why she was sprinting off to get help. The party hurries inside and spots Krazia slumped against the wall, barely staying upright, so they rush over to see if she is okay. She tells them she's mostly okay, but someone drugged her earlier, and by the time she came to Olivia was already gone. It's not hard to piece together who did it because clearly Olivia slipped her something, but Krazia's more worried than angry. She's convinced Olivia might run off into the labyrinth again, probably chasing revenge. Ornest doesn't see why that's their problem, and if Olivia's dead set on risking her life for payback, that's on her. But Krazia fires back, explaining that Olivia's still not fully recovered. Injuries haven't healed, and she's in no shape for another fight. Ornest gets that, sure, but to him it still doesn't change the fact that it was Olivia's choice to begin with. And besides, she's the top swordswoman in the kingdom, so he seriously doubts the Shadow Guild has what it takes to take her down again. Maybe not on their own, but Krazia remembers Olivia saying something about a traitor. If that's true, then it wasn't just the Shadow Guild that brought her down. Someone else was involved, someone powerful enough to leave the country's strongest warrior in critical condition. And Krazia's not about to let her charge headfirst into that kind of danger again, not when she can do something about it. So she says if nobody else is willing to go, then fine, she'll handle it herself. But the second she steps outside, she realizes the others are right behind her. They tell her they're not about to let her march into a place like that on her own. If saving Olivia really means that much to her, then they're coming too, no questions asked. Together, the group makes their way to the entrance of the labyrinth dungeon, but Ornest is clearly not thrilled. Alec asks him what's wrong, so Yora jumps in and explains that the dungeon's a mess of teleportation traps, scattered all over the place, making it a total nightmare to get through. Marbell then chimes in, warning that it's super common for teams to get split up in there, so everyone needs to stay sharp. That's good advice, but now they're all wondering what the hell Marbell is doing here anyway. Marbell explains that she heard Olivia took off from the guild and was headed back into the dungeon, so she came rushing here to stop her before she entered. But she was already too late, and that's why she wants to join their party. She says Luorg also asked her to step in as a substitute for Olivia, since she's also an S-rank swordswoman. But the real reason she came is because she wanted to see Alec's incredible magic in action, up close and personal. Yora isn't having any of it though, and she shoves Marbell back and tells her that unlike the Nameless party, they actually function like a proper team, and they're not about to throw off their rhythm just to add someone new. Alec then turns to Ornest confused, and asks what Yora meant by that, so Ornest explains that while Nameless is technically a party, the members act more like solo adventurers doing their own thing. Luorg was the one who somehow got them to work together, but outside of dungeon runs, they're barely even on speaking terms. Take Olivia for example. She hates involving others in her problems and never accepts help. She can come off cold or downright rude, but Marbell insists she's a good person underneath all that. Marbell used to hang around Olivia all the time when she was training. At first, Olivia tried to shake her off, saying she worked better alone and only joined Nameless because she needed a party to get through dungeons. But instead of backing off, that just made Marbell more persistent. And since Olivia didn't seem to care much for her team anyway, Marbell asked if she'd like to raid a dungeon together sometime. And Olivia actually said yes, so they've been close ever since. Marbell says she won't insist on coming if she's just going to slow them down, but she's genuinely worried about Olivia and begs them to do whatever they can to bring her back safely. But before heading in, Ornest tosses a wristband to Alec and tells him to wear it because it's their hidden trump card for this dungeon. Alec has no clue what it does, but he trusts Ornest and puts it on without arguing. Once they're all set, The group enters the labyrinth together, but before they move in too far, Krazia stops to set up a teleportation circle of her own. That way, if anyone ends up falling into a random teleportation trap, they'll have a safe way to get beamed to this point in an instant. Ornest is actually impressed that Krazia had the foresight to set everything up like this, so he casually starts patting her on the head. But Krazia doesn't appreciate being treated like a kid, especially not from him, so she immediately stops mid-cast and drop-kicks him so hard he goes flying across the room. Unfortunately, his landing isn't so lucky because he smacks right into a teleportation trap. Alec panics and rushes over to try and help, but the moment he steps forward, he triggers a trap too, and just like that, both of them get warped to some random part of the dungeon, and it is pretty much Krazia's fault. Over on Alec's side, he has no clue where he landed, but he's surrounded by a swarm of monsters and quickly realizes he's going to have to fight solo. As the horde charges, Alec unleashes Thunderbolt after Thunderbolt, wiping out anything that gets too close. But one slips past his defenses and lunges from behind, only to get dropped instantly by a sharp arrow that pierces straight through it. Alec turns and breathes a sigh of relief when he sees Krazia standing there, but he can't help but wonder how she tracked him down so fast, and she explains it's thanks to the wristband he's wearing. It's called a Mobius ring, and when two people wear a matching pair, the ring keeps them from being separated. So no matter how many teleportation traps Alec triggers, the ring will always drag Krazia to wherever he lands, guaranteeing they stick together. Yorha and Ornest are wearing the other set, so they should be fine too, but things don't exactly look great on their side, as a massive mob of monsters is chasing them down. Ornest might be able to handle this on his own, but Yorha doesn't have any combat strength, so she quickly conjures an earth pillar to lift herself out of reach, while Ornest dives straight into the chaos. She buffs him with a quick burst of stamina and speed, just enough to keep him from burning out mid-battle. With that boost, Ornest surges forward and slices clean through the biggest monster's neck in one strike. That brutal takedown is enough to send the rest of the smaller creatures scrambling, completely terrified. Ornest sighs, a little let down since they would have made a good warm-up. Yorha climbs down and tells him he handled the whole thing like a pro, and Ornest soaks up the praise, clearly enjoying every second. But as they continue forward, they stumble upon something unexpected, and it's the remains of the dungeon floor's boss. Yorha freezes because the thing looks like it was obliterated in one clean sword strike, and she can't think of a single person capable of something like that, but Ornest can. There's only one person who could pull that off, and it's Meli Dial, the Blade Master. At the same time, in another part of the dungeon, the leader of the Shadow Guild is speaking with Meli, praising him for how impressive he is, because not only did he one-shot the floor boss, but he also wiped the floor with Olivia, the S-rank swordswoman from Nameless. Meli casually responds that the only reason it was so easy is because he knows her, and he knows how she moves, how she fights, and exactly how to counter her. The guild leader remarks that that would explain why Olivia was so stunned when she saw him, but then he questions why someone who clearly has a history with an S-rank like Olivia would even bother siding with the Shadow Guild. And if they were close, wouldn't it have made more sense for Meli to work with her instead? But Meli calmly replies that while his goals happen to align with the guild's at the moment, his ambitions are different. Also, he doesn't care what the Shadow Guild's ambitions are because all he wants is to grow stronger, and for that he needs real battles and real experience. Right then, a few Shadow Guild members arrive and inform their leader that intruders were spotted on the 72nd floor, so the leader wastes no time and orders them to hunt the intruders down and kill them on sight. Meanwhile, Alec and Krazia manage to find Olivia huddled in a corner, sporting fresh injuries. The moment she spots them, she casually asks Krazia to patch her up so she can keep moving. But Krazia flat out refuses because she knows full well that if she heals her now, Olivia is just going to run off again the second she's able to stand. Annoyed, Olivia glares at her, but she doesn't argue. Instead, she grits her teeth and forces herself back onto her feet, determined to keep going despite the pain. Alec and Krazia quickly step in her way, blocking her path. Krazia tells her she's not letting her leave until she explains what this is all about, and she asks if this is tied to the Shadow Guild somehow. But Olivia scoffs at the idea. She says there's no way she'd ever lose to those weaklings, and the one she's really after is her former teacher. He's the one who let her mother die, and she intends to kill him with her own hands. Without another word, Olivia steps onto a teleportation trap to make her escape, but Alec and Krazia spot what she's doing just in time and dive onto the circle right before it activates. And in an instant, all three of them are warped together, straight into the middle of a monster nest. Realizing they were completely surrounded, Alec hurled himself into the thick of the monster horde, cutting through them with nothing but sheer grit and resolve. Without a second thought, Olivia drew her sword to back him up, but Krazia quickly held her back. After patching up Olivia's injuries, Krazia told her she was preparing a teleportation spell, though it was obvious Alec couldn't last forever on his own. Touched by her concern, Olivia gave a small nod and a faint smile, then sprinted forward to fight at Alec's side. And as the two battled to hold the line, Krazia began channeling the escape spell with all her focus. Mid-battle, a hulking Cyclops takes a swing at Alec. He sidesteps with ease and counters, but his strike barely phases it. It retaliates fiercely, pushing him against the wall of enemies, until Olivia charges in and decapitates several beasts in one clean sweep. Alec blinks, stunned that he hadn't even seen her draw, and she casually points out that he's still green when it comes to dealing with high-level monsters. Just then, Krazia finishes the teleportation circle and calls for Alec, but the magic sigil flickers and vanishes. Alec immediately figures out that there's a magic eater nearby, and his fears are confirmed as more of the creatures flood into the chamber. Back to back with Olivia, Alec stands firm as she dashes forward and effortlessly slays another beast. Watching her carve through the horde with precision, Alec can't help but compare her style to Ornest's. Where Ornest fought loud and dramatic, Olivia's strikes were sharp, clean, and merciless. Not wanting to be left in the dust, Alec pushes forward and slays a few himself. Olivia gives him credit for his power and sword handling, but points out that his technique is still too raw. She tells him to stop forcing his strength and instead let his blade flow naturally with his movement. While Krazia scans the area for the monsters suppressing their magic, Olivia and Alec realize the swarm just keeps coming. Olivia calls out, asking if Krazia can locate the magic eater. Krazia shouts back that she's found it, but it's surrounded by a massive cluster of monsters. Without hesitation, Olivia charges straight into the mob, slicing down anything in her way to shield Krazia from danger. Alec darts around the chamber, trying to draw the rest away, but a winged beast swoops down on him. He raises his blade just in time to deflect the strike and knock it back. But the damn thing doesn't give up, and it keeps chasing him relentlessly, so Alec baits it into clashing with a nearby Cyclops. The bird tears through it in seconds, but its focus never leaves Alec. At the same time, Olivia keeps closing the distance between herself and the magic eater until she finally brings it down and smashes the artifact it was guarding. She quickly calls out to Krazia, letting her know it's done, so Krazia immediately starts charging up a fresh teleportation circle. As soon as it's ready, she calls for Alec, who unleashes a full-powered thunderstrike that electrocutes the swarm of monsters still harassing him. And once they're down, he hurries back to Krazia, who's waiting for Olivia to make it through. After fighting her way past the relentless tide, Olivia finally breaks through and reaches them. She grabs Alec's hand, and with everyone together, Krazia activates the spell and warps them out of the monster-infested death trap. Once they're safely outside, Olivia turns to Alec and asks why he never told her he could use magic like that. He reminds her he already mentioned it before, but Olivia argues that no proper mage would ever charge into a monster horde swinging a sword. She admits it feels weird scolding him like she's some kind of mentor, but still thanks him for helping her survive that hellish room. Alec says he'll keep her advice in mind, then glances at Krazia and asks if she's relieved they all made it out. But she's not in a joking mood and tells him he's brushing things off too easily, and points out that Olivia's injuries still haven't fully healed. She warns that if Olivia keeps fighting so recklessly, her wounds are going to reopen. Then she brings up what Olivia had said earlier about the one who betrayed her, asking who it was that hurt her so badly. Olivia finally opens up. She says her mother was a fellow adventurer who died when she was still a child, leaving her completely alone. In her darkest days, a man named Mage took her in and raised her like his own daughter. He trained her in the sword and passed down all his secret techniques. Even though the pain of losing her mom never fully faded, the memories and her training gave her something to hold on to. And over time, Olivia came to respect her master deeply for his strength and teachings. Years passed. After becoming a skilled swordswoman herself, she asked Mage if she had finally become strong. He smiled and said she'd surpassed everything he ever expected from her, then drew a blade soaked in blood. Olivia stood frozen in disbelief as he slashed a deep wound across her back. As she collapsed on the cold dungeon floor, bleeding out, Mage told her he was the one who killed her mother all those years ago. Then he walked away, leaving her broken, abandoned, and stripped of everything she had left. Back in the present, Olivia still feels that gut-wrenching betrayal because Mage had manipulated her into admiring him, all while being the one who shattered her world. Then she turns around and pulls back her clothing, revealing the massive scar etched across her back. To her, that single sword strike didn't just steal her trust. It erased every moment of warmth and every good memory they'd ever shared. Now all she feels she has left is this cruel reminder carved into her skin. Watching her break, Alec silently drapes his jacket over her shoulders and tells her he knows exactly how that feels. He admits that once, he also thought he'd lost everything, but his friends were the ones who made him realize he hadn't. Olivia, her voice heavy with pain, mutters that she doesn't need anyone, but Alec gently reminds her that even Lorg is out there fighting to avenge her. That silences her, so Krazia steps forward, quietly mentioning that while treating her earlier, she'd noticed countless other bruises hidden across Olivia's body. She admits she can't do anything about the old scars, but promises she'll always be there to help with the new ones, no matter what. Hearing that, Olivia clenches her fists, realizing that both Lorg and Marbel have been doing their best to support her all along. But deep down, she doesn't think they understand how terrifying Mage truly is. In her mind, there's no way either of them can take him down. Alec speaks up firmly and says that if Lorg and Marbel can't do it, then he and Krazia will stand by her instead. Overwhelmed by their sincerity, Olivia's composure finally cracks, and she breaks into tears, so Krazia steps closer and gently kisses her forehead, comforting her until the crying stops. Somewhere deeper in the dungeon, Ornest groans about the endless traps he's been running into. Yora, clearly annoyed, points out that most of those traps were triggered because of his reckless behavior. Still, she warns him to stay alert because someone has already defeated the floor boss, and that means things could get worse. And while she worries about Alec and Krazia, Ornest shrugs it off, guessing that Melia is probably already on the final floor. He reasons that Melia likely won't bother attacking Alec or Krazia, and Yora finally starts to relax. But then Ornest catches her off guard by gripping her cap and motioning for her to stay silent. Not far from them, members of the Shadow Guild quietly advance through the dungeon, with their leader casually swallowing a dungeon core. Moments later, Yorha and Ornest intercept them, assuming this crew might be the ones who hurt Olivia. The leader spots them and instantly recognizes potential value, ordering his squad to attack. But it's over in a flash, as Ornest wipes the floor with them in just 2 seconds and ties up the entire group like it's nothing. He steps up to the leader and demands to know what the Shadow Guild is after, but the guy stays tight-lipped until Yorha wraps a poison-laced chain around his neck. Choking under the pressure, the man finally caves and admits they were targeting the dungeon core on the final floor. Yorha then questions if he knows Meli, so the man confirms and adds that Meli's power is leagues beyond theirs. Realizing these guys aren't the real threat here, Ornest tells Yorha it's time to press forward and catch up with Alec. Just as they start to head out, the tied-up man smirks and tells Ornest that swallowing the dungeon core wasn't just for show. Ornest stares in confusion, but Yorha suddenly picks up on a strange vibration echoing through the dungeon walls, but she can't trace its source, so she quickly tells Ornest to be quiet, but it's already too late as the entire room starts violently shaking. From the ground, the man grins, announcing that the core gave him full control over the dungeon. The tremor intensifies and the earth cracks open beneath them. Yorha stumbles and a massive chasm tears through the floor, and one by one, the Shadow Guild members tumble into the abyss. Before Yorha can fall, the guild leader catches her mid-drop and vanishes into the depths with her in tow. Grinning wickedly, he calls out to Ornest, declaring that he's taking this special prize with him, and dares him to follow him into the dungeon's deepest level for the final showdown. Elsewhere, Olivia is caught off guard when she finds out that Alec once served as Galdana's Imperial Court magician. He tells her that despite the title, most of his magic was self-taught during childhood, and after losing both his parents early on, he had nothing else to do but practice relentlessly. And as Olivia quietly thinks that Alec is way more suited for adventure than political duties, Krazia suddenly stops in her tracks. She explains that before entering the dungeon, she and Yorha had agreed to regroup at this spot if anything went wrong. But since Yorha hasn't shown up, Krazia suspects she's run into trouble. Right then, they spot a massive chasm tearing through the ground ahead. Curious and concerned, they move closer and Olivia spots something inside and immediately jumps in, snatching Yorha's cap, which Alec recognizes instantly. Elsewhere, Yorha regains consciousness surrounded by the Shadow Guild and demands to know why they spared her life. Gloria smirks and tells her it's a secret, mocking her for acting like she's in control. From nearby, Meli scolds him to quit fooling around, but Gloria insists he was just kidding. Suddenly, Ornest bursts into the room and smashes the core eater in one swift blow. Gloria springs up to engage him, yelling at his partner to keep moving. The core eater, stunned that Ornest found them, quickly realizes the tracking was possible because of the bracelets they were both wearing. As he rips Yora's bracelet off her wrist, Ornest asks why he was so eager to capture her. The man refuses to answer, knocks Yorha out, and hauls her away. Ornest threatens to tear him apart if he lays a finger on her, but the core eater doesn't even flinch and bolts alongside Melia. Then Gloria blocks Ornest from giving chase and remarks that Ornest won't be easy to beat. During the clash, Ornest observes that Gloria's sword, despite its power, isn't a genuine artifact. Trusting his spear, Ornest smashes Gloria's weapon and drives it straight through his gut. As Gloria crashes to the ground bleeding, Ornest turns to pursue Meli, but Gloria suddenly erupts in a deranged scream. Lying there drenched in blood, Gloria cries out that Melia is a heartless bastard for dragging him into something so reckless. Swearing revenge, he rages that he'll slaughter them all, and as Ornest turns to finish the job, Gloria raises both hands, summoning a demonic force that absorbs his blood and rapidly closes his wounds. His broken blade reshapes itself through the dark energy, and with a chilling grin, Gloria warns Ornest that he's about to bring his life to an end. Ornest immediately realizes this man is a real danger because he has never witnessed magic like this before, not even from healers who could restore allies in the middle of combat. This power felt far darker and more warped, but Ornest doesn't waste time thinking about it, and he lunges forward without hesitation, driving his spear straight into the man's abdomen, then follows up with a brutal kick that sends him flying. Gloria spits out a mouthful of blood, but Ornest gives him no chance to recover. He charges again and thrusts his spear clean through Gloria's chest, fully convinced this time it's over. But then Gloria starts laughing, and to Ornest's disbelief, the man stands right back up on his own feet and begins yanking the spear from his chest like it's nothing. He mocks Ornest, calling him just another loud idiot with more guts than brain, and adds that no matter how many times Ornest tries to kill him, it won't make a damn difference. Even if his head gets chopped off, he'll just keep crawling back. Suddenly, the blood spilling from Gloria's wounds begins to glow. It flows up his arm and solidifies into a blade. Ornest is taken aback, watching in shock as Gloria grins like a lunatic, declaring that pain only makes him stronger. The more damage he takes, the tougher he becomes, so poking him with that toy of a spear won't get Ornest anywhere. Then with a roar, Gloria slams the blood blade downward with monstrous force. Ornest narrowly dodges, but the sheer power behind the strike leaves him rattled. Before he can fully recover, Gloria cuts him across the body in a fast, clean motion, tearing open multiple wounds. Ornest stumbles back, dodging the follow-up attack, but it's clear he's on the back foot now. He's already bleeding, outmatched, and cornered, and if he doesn't figure something out fast, he's finished. But before any plan can form, Gloria conjures up a blood-soaked whip and lashes it straight across Ornest's face. The impact sends him reeling, and before he can regain his balance, the whip coils around his legs, hoists him into the air, then slams him into the ground like a ragdoll. Ornest's spear goes flying, and he hits the dirt hard, gasping for air, barely able to move. Gloria then bursts out laughing and taunts Ornest, saying if that was all he had, then he was nothing more than a glorified training dummy, perfect for venting some frustration. Then Gloria throws his head back and cackles like a man possessed, telling Ornest to prepare himself, because this was where his story ends. But right then, Ornest digs deep and finds every last shred of strength left in his body. Gritting his teeth, he forces himself back on his feet and growls at Gloria to shut that ugly mouth of his, because he's not the one dying today. Gloria looks him over, battered and bleeding, and just bursts out laughing. But as Ornest steadies himself, he recalls that Alec once told him that sometimes you got to fight without your weapon. And for the first time, Ornest decides to take that advice seriously. He calls out to his spear, and it instantly reacts, rising into the air and rocketing toward Gloria like a missile. Gloria jumps aside with a sneer, mocking him for thinking he'd fall for a cheap trick like that. But the opening was all Ornest needed, because he charges in while Gloria is still distracted and lands a clean punch across his face, sending him crashing to the ground. As Gloria reels from the hit, Ornest flashes back to the very first time he ever sparred with Alec. Alec was a mage, but insisted on going toe-to-toe in a straight fight, no magic allowed. Ornest called him nuts for even trying, thinking it would be a one-sided beatdown, but Alec was the kind of guy who got good at anything he put his mind to. They clashed hard, Alec wielding his mana-forged blade, while Ornest came at him with rapid spear jabs and brutal swings. To Ornest's surprise, Alec actually held his own and even managed to force Ornest onto the defensive at times. But Ornest wasn't one to back down easy, so he ramped up the pressure and gave it everything he had. At one point, while winding up for a heavy strike, Ornest's spear suddenly slipped from his grip and got lodged in the nearby wall. Both of them froze for a second, wide-eyed. But Ornest didn't hesitate, and he rushed in with his fists instead, catching Alec off guard. Just as things were heating up though, their furious teacher stormed in and shut the whole thing down. As punishment, they were both stuck in the garden for the rest of the day, yanking weeds under the blazing sun. That afternoon, after hours of pulling weeds, the two of them slumped onto the grass and watched the sun dip below the horizon. That's when Alec turned Ornest and said he was seriously impressed, because he never expected Ornest to recover that fast, and he was sure he would have lost if the teacher hadn't interrupted, and Ornest had just smiled back, quietly proud like always. Snapping back to the present, Ornest watches as Gloria starts to stand again, not about to give him a second to breathe. Ornest rushes forward, throwing a solid right hook, but Gloria crosses his arms and catches the blow with a tight guard. Ornest doesn't stop and hammers away, fist after fist, each strike hitting harder than the last. The pressure mounts and Gloria's guard begins to crack until finally it shatters. Ornest lands 2 fast punches to the face, then slams a brutal uppercut that launches Gloria straight into the wall like a wrecking ball. Ornest yells at him to get back up, shouting that if stabbing makes him stronger, then fine, he'll just beat him senseless with his fists instead. But before he can follow up, Gloria slowly rises to his feet again. This time though, he doesn't charge in. He pulls 2 blood-forged daggers straight from his arms and slashes himself across the gut. The gushing blood fuels his power, and a massive magic circle forms above his head, swirling into a cyclone that starts roaring toward Ornest, ready to tear him apart. Realizing there's no escaping that kind of magic, Ornest braces himself, accepting whatever comes next. But just then, Alec leaps between them and unleashes his reflection spell, bouncing the entire attack back at Gloria. Ornest stares in shock, then thanks Alec, admitting he would have been toast if he hadn't stepped in at just the right moment. But before they can exchange another word, Gloria steps out of the flames, burned, wounded, but still standing. Olivia's eyes narrow as she immediately identifies him as a blood mage. Troubled, she declares she'll try to put him down quickly. But then Ornus turns to Alec and admits he failed to protect Yorha, and she was taken by the Blade Master and some cocky bastard right in front of him. Krasia, confused and furious, asks what the hell the Shadow Guild would want with Yorha. But Ornus certain they knew exactly who she was because the cocky bastard even said her name. He urges Alec and the others to chase after her while he holds off the blood mage here. But Krasia shuts him up and uses her healing magic to ease his pain. Right then, Gloria lashes out again, launching more attacks their way. Alec manages to reflect them once more, giving Krasia and Olivia the window they need to slip past and run after Yorha. Gloria grins at their tactic and taunts Alec, telling him to quit spamming that annoying reflection spell. Alec snaps back, daring him to stop hiding behind magic and fight like a man. At the same time, Olivia tosses Ornus' spear back to him. So now Gloria is facing two armed fighters and the tide has shifted. But before the clash can restart, Gloria suddenly drops to one knee, realizing just how badly his body's been wrecked. Ornus can't help but laugh, saying Gloria's flashy blood magic is worthless against Alec, who could have taken him down with his eyes shut. That's when Gloria glares up at him, rage burning behind his eyes. He rips off the bandages wrapped around his arms, revealing a maze of carved symbols etched into his flesh. Chanting under his breath, he releases the seals, triggering a horrific transformation. Muscles swell unnaturally, fangs tear through his gums, and a red aura crackles around him. Then in a burst of speed, he launches at Ornus, and before anyone can react, Gloria's already sunk his jaws deep into Ornus' neck, biting down hard. Alec immediately clocks what's happening and fires off a blast of lightning magic to knock the blood mage away, freeing Ornus from his jaws. But the damage is already done. Ornus hits the ground, completely motionless. Wasting no time, Alec launches a rapid volley of lightning spells, but to his shock, Gloria is so absurdly fast that he zips right through them, dodging every bolt like it's nothing. Alec quickly shifts tactics, and instead of aiming directly at Gloria, he summons a massive arcane circle overhead and calls down lightning from every direction, hoping to blanket the area and force a hit. But even that plan crumbles as Gloria taps deeper into his blood magic, fully restoring his strength. He gathers a torrent of blood into twin razor-sharp daggers and hurls bladed shockwaves at Alec, forcing him to throw up a mana shield around himself and Ornus to prevent them both from being torn apart. The final strike shatters Alec's barrier, and Gloria thinks he's finally cornered his prey. Just as he prepares to finish Alec off, he notices that Ornus' body is gone. He then spins around and sees Ornus leaping at him, spear in hand, going for the kill. But Gloria reacts just in time, deflecting each thrust with his daggers and swatting Ornus away, even landing a solid kick right to his face. Ornus hits the ground hard, but he scrambles back up, only to be driven down again by Gloria's relentless onslaught, dodging, parrying, striking, and punishing him with vicious kicks that send him stumbling back until he collapses again. Turning to Alec with a twisted grin, Gloria mocks him, saying it's his turn to watch now. Watch as his useless little friend bleeds out right in front of him, powerless to stop it. But to his surprise, Ornus isn't done yet, and out of nowhere, he drives his spear into Gloria's gut, and the weapon erupts in flame. As the blood mage recoils, Ornus thinks back to when he was a kid. He used to train with a boy who was practically a prodigy with the spear, and no matter how hard Ornus tried, how much time he put in, how many bruises he racked up, he never stood a chance. That kid never trained a single day in his life and still wiped the floor with him. But in the end, it wasn't Ornus who beat him, it was the hard fate. The prodigy ended up with lung cancer and dropped dead before he ever became anything. Fueled by that bitter memory, Ornus charges in again, throwing blow after blow at Gloria, forcing the blood mage back under the weight of his burning resolve. Alec watches closely, heart racing, wondering if this final push will be enough to finish the fight, or if Gloria still has one last terrifying trick left. Ornus then flashes a smug smile at Gloria, who's still reeling from how much damage he just took. But Ornus just shrugs, saying he hasn't even started trying yet. Then he shoots a look over to Alec and says it's time to bust out the real combo, the one move nobody's ever walked away from. Gloria's jaw tightens, and he can't tell if these two lunatics are bluffing or if they're really about to turn him into a smear on the floor. But before he can even process it, Alec whips out a blazing magic circle and launches his flame spell, setting Ornus' spear on fire like it's a freaking bonfire. Gloria's eyes go wide because flame magic's no joke, and using it on your own teammate is basically asking for a funeral. But Ornus isn't about to stop for a safety lecture. He bolts forward with brutal speed, raining down a flurry of strikes, trying to land 100 hits in the blink of an eye. Gloria does everything he can to keep up, but Ornus' speed is too much. He slips past his guard and delivers a vicious blow, slicing Gloria's right arm clean off. Staggering back, Gloria screams at Alec, warning him that if he keeps this up, he'll end up torching his own partner. But Ornus shuts him down immediately, yelling for Alec to send another fire blast. Alec just smirks, impressed by his buddy's grit, and hurls another wave of fire straight at him. Wrapped in a blazing whirlwind, Ornest launches into the air and slams into Gloria, who tries to counter with his enchanted weapon. But at this point, Ornest has way too much power backing him. He drives Gloria back, slamming him to the ground with brute force, and he doesn't let up. Before Gloria can even blink, Ornest is right back in his face, hammering him with non-stop attacks. Gloria blocks what he can, but he's outmatched, outpaced, and it's not enough. Ornest breaks through and delivers another savage slash, this time tearing off his left arm from the shoulder. As he stands over the wrecked mess that was Gloria, Ornest's mind flashes back to the boy who always beat him during training. He clenches his weapon, vowing to honor him by proving he had what it took to become the world's greatest lancer. Channeling every ounce of strength and rage he has, Ornest lunges with one final, devastating thrust, driving his flaming spear straight through Gloria's chest. The force is so violent that it splits his torso from his lower half, and his mangled body crashes to the ground in pieces. With the fight finished, Ornest turns to Alec, walking over with fire still burning in his eyes, declaring that nothing's going to stop them from becoming the #1 party in the world. At the same time, Yorha regains consciousness on a completely different level, only to be greeted by the twisted freak with a Joker-like mug leering over her. He sneers and holds up the dungeon core, mocking her struggle, says he gets a real kick out of watching adventurers bust their asses clearing every floor, only for him to swoop in at the last second, kill them, and snatch the prize for himself. He laughs coldly and tells her none of her friends are making it out alive, but before he can finish running his mouth, a sudden flash of steel slices through his back, cut deep and brutal by the Blade Master himself, who leaves him writhing in a pool of his own blood. Melee turns to Yorha, saying he was sick of listening to the guy's voice. He snatches the core from the dying man and walks up to her, calling her a seeker and asking her to take him to Eden. Yorha's eyebrows shoot up because she has zero clue what the hell he's talking about, so he goes on to explain that seekers are a rare breed, chosen ones able to see Eden, a hidden realm where the dungeon core supposedly grants any wish the holder desires. Yorha cuts him off, saying she doesn't know anything about seekers or Eden or whatever fantasy he's babbling about. Just then, the punk bleeding out on the floor groans through a mouthful of blood, cursing Melia for daring to cross the Shadow Guild, and he promises they'll hunt him down and make him pay. But Melia's already over it, and without blinking, he finishes the guy with a clean, effortless slash. He says he couldn't care less about guilds, vengeance, or anything else because his only goal is to sharpen his skills in battle. But the problem is, once people start calling him the Blade Master, suddenly no one's got the guts to fight him. So if the challengers stop showing up, you've got no choice but to start making your own. That's when his head snaps to the side. He senses something and turns to see Olivia and Krazia approaching. A smirk creeps across his face as he tells Olivia she really should have stayed home after their last encounter. But Olivia's done playing nice. Her voice shakes with fury as she shouts that she's here for revenge, and there's no way in hell he's getting out alive. Yorha, seeing familiar faces, finally feels a flicker of hope and shouts at Melie to run if he wants to live. Ornest and Alec could show up at any moment, and when they do, he'll be outmatched and outnumbered. But Melie just smiles wider, like the thought of death doesn't even register. He tells Yorha that if she's trying to scare him off to dodge a real fight, she couldn't be more wrong. Then his grin stretches even further when he asks if the Alec she mentioned is Alec Ygritte, son of Arya Ygritte. Yorha freezes, confused as hell, demanding to know how he could possibly know that name. But Melie doesn't answer and just stares ahead, amused, and mutters that things are about to get really interesting. Up on the higher floor, Ornest finally collapses, completely drained after the brutal fight. Breathing heavy, he realizes he'd only slow the others down if he pushed himself any further, and admits that he's in no shape to keep going, at least not for now. Alec gives him a reassuring grin and tosses him a healing potion, telling him to take it easy, and promises he'll get Yorha back and make sure she doesn't get hurt. But just as he's about to head out, Ornest grabs his attention one last time and seriously warns him that this Blade Master isn't someone to mess with. That guy wiped out the dungeon bosses in one swing, and he even remembers how their class teacher once chewed him out for acting reckless, and specifically warned that if he ever ran into that man, he should avoid a fight at all costs. But Alec just chuckles, telling him not to stress because he never makes a move without thinking it through. With that, he vows to bring the girls back in one piece, then vanishes in a flash, while Ornest leans back on the floor, finally letting himself rest. Meanwhile, down on the lower floor, Olivia charges straight at the Blade Master, her eyes burning with rage as she screams that she'll make him pay for what he did to her mother. But just as she's about to reach him, she suddenly shifts direction, vaults into the air, and grabs Yorha, pulling her out of harm's way. She drops her off safely and immediately shouts for Krazia to attack. Without missing a beat, Krazia unleashes her arrow rain spell, summoning a storm of glowing arrows that rain down all at once. But Melie doesn't flinch and calmly raises his cloak, and just like that, every single arrow shatters on impact, like they were nothing. He grins as he looks over at the three of them, amused, but the girls aren't backing down. Yora throws up her bind spell, trapping him in a net of glowing chains, while Krejia knocks another arrow and readies her bow. But this time, Yora adds flame enchantment to boost the shot even more. Krejia lets the arrow fly and a blazing, spiraling projectile straight at the Blade Master, who's still caught in the bind. But instead of panicking, Melia simply smirks, and in the blink of an eye, his sword flashes out, cleaving through the chains and slicing the flaming arrow in half like it was paper. Krejia stares in shock because that was her ultimate move, amplified by Yora's magic, so it should have torn through anything. But this man just cut through it like it didn't even exist. Olivia instantly presses the attack and realizes that Melee had already anticipated her move to rescue Yora. He allowed it to happen on purpose, just to witness their strongest technique and measure exactly how powerful or powerless they really are. In that moment, she finally understands why he's the only person granted permission to operate as a solo S-rank party, while everyone else must fight in teams. She slips behind him and swings for his neck, but it's completely useless. Without even turning around, Melia blocks her strike and shoves her backward with ease. Olivia snarls that she'll be the one to take his head tonight and make him pay for every bit of pain he's caused her. Melie doesn't even acknowledge her threat. Instead, he coldly remarks that there must be an exceptional healer in Faisal, since the injuries he inflicted on her would push most healers to their absolute limit. The sudden shift in his tone catches Olivia off guard. He continues, saying she's found herself some capable allies, and that the archer enhanced by Yora's support magic showed genuine promise. But his expression hardens as he adds that sadly they will never live long enough to reach that potential. To him, they're nothing more than children pretending to be adventurers. He turns back to Olivia, sneering as he calls her a disgrace, saying he's thoroughly disappointed in how weak she's become and asking whether she ever learned a single thing from him. He tells her she won't be getting any more chances to train because he's about to teach her one final lesson, and it's death. A freezing chill runs through Olivia as memories flood back of how, for most of her life, he was like a father to her, guiding her, shaping her, telling her she might even surpass him one day. That realization only fuels her rage further. She explodes forward with fury in her eyes, slashing at Melia with everything she has. But he stops her blade effortlessly, then smashes the back of his sword across her face without hesitation. But he doesn't stop there, and follows it with a brutal kick to her stomach that launches her straight into a massive boulder. Krejia can't hold back at the sight of it and instantly fires an arrow at Melia. He casually snatches it out of the air and snaps it in half with his bare hands, then tells Olivia coldly that a person is better off alone, because loneliness is what truly forges strength. With that, he turns toward Krejia and Yora and unleashes an overwhelmingly powerful strike that would have killed them instantly. But at the very last second, Olivia forces her broken body to move and throws herself in front of them, stopping the attack from reaching Krejia and Yorha. The blow tears into her instead, and she crashes to the ground as blood pours from her wounds. Krejia instantly drops down beside her, trying to heal her wounds, but Olivia urges her to save her strength and get out of there while she still can. Just then, Alec bursts onto the scene, charging straight at Melia with fury in his eyes, swinging his sword with everything he's got. Melie blocks the blow effortlessly with his own blade and shoves Alec backward. Alec sticks the landing, quickly tells the girls to look after Olivia, and then charges in again without hesitation. Melie remains composed, drawing his sword as they clash in a relentless flurry of slashes and counters, neither giving an inch. Both leap back to reset their stance, and Melie uses the break to taunt Olivia again, calling her pitiful, which pushes Alec over the edge. He charges again, but Melie sidesteps with ease. With a smug grin, Melia mocks him, saying he's a mage, not a swordsman, and if he wants to save his pathetic friends from dying a brutal death, he better start using real magic. That's all it takes to set Alec off, so he roars in rage, summoning a massive lightning dragon and hurling it at Melia. But the Blade Master doesn't flinch and plants his feet, braces himself, and with pure grit, he holds the beast back, deflecting the strike with his sword. Yora watches in disbelief, stunned that anyone could even hold their ground against such overwhelming power. But Melie doesn't stop there, and he slices straight through the dragon like it's nothing, completely wiping out the spell with one clean strike. Alec stares in shock as Melie grins, blood trickling down from his forehead. He says Alec might be the ideal prey to satisfy his hunger, but mocks him for being a weak mage, claiming he didn't sense a shred of killing intent in that attack. Alec just smirks, thinking back to Ornith's warning not to go too far. Then he turns to Melie and says if he wants to witness real power, then he better pay attention this time. His body begins to glow as he activates his trump card, Limit Break. Yora gasps, stunned that he'd actually use it. She reveals that Alec once created a forbidden spell of his own design, one that overrides his natural limits by drawing mana directly from the environment. It shatters every boundary and lets him tap into the full extent of his magical strength. With it, he gains control over all elements: earth, water, fire, lightning, and ice. But it comes at a price. The spell eats away at his life force and could straight up kill him if he pushes it too far. Still, Alec doesn't give a damn, and he locks eyes with Melia and tells him to come at him with everything, because only one of them's walking out of this dungeon breathing. Then we learn that this world holds thousands of distinct types of mana, and trying to absorb any mana that isn't your own is basically like injecting poison into your veins. And because of that, it's widely accepted that pulling mana from the surroundings is flat out impossible, so mages are taught to generate it internally, no exceptions, but Alec completely defies that shit. 4 years earlier, when the group was still gearing up for their showdown with the Hydra, they were scoring the library for any shred of useful information they could dig up on the monster. Unfortunately, what they found was discouraging. The Hydra had 5 heads, each representing a different element, and the only way to defeat it was to strike all 5 heads with those 5 elements simultaneously. That immediately posed a major issue, as they had only 4 members, and Ornus couldn't use magic at all. Alec already had fire and lightning under his belt, so those 2 were covered, but pulling off the remaining 3 would be tough. Krasia, even though she rarely tapped into it, technically had an affinity for air, so she might be able to manage with some training. Yorha, on the other hand, had a natural connection to both earth and water, but the problem is she was awful at offensive magic, and no amount of grinding would fix that. She ends up apologizing to the team for holding them back, but Alec doesn't blame her because he already had a workaround in mind. Since mana exists all around them, he figured that if he could somehow draw in external mana, he'd be able to cast any element with no restrictions. The others thought the theory sounded great, but none of them had ever heard of anyone actually pulling that off. Even if Alec did manage it, it'd just end up tearing his body apart from the inside because external mana is toxic after all. Still, Alec seemed dead set on exploring the idea, so he snatched a bunch of books and ran off to study the concept on his own. And what he's doing now is the result of that research. Yorha explains that in this state, Alec can tap into all the ambient mana nearby, letting him unleash any kind of spell without limit. He instantly launches a 5 elemental barrier at Melia. At first, Melia stands his ground, handling Alec's attacks, but then he slips up and gets trapped in a wind-based spell. He manages to cut his way out eventually, but not before taking a solid hit to the chest. It's the first time any of them have actually managed to injure Melia, and seeing that gives Yorha and Krasia hope, because now they believe Alec might actually have a shot at beating his ass. Alec keeps up the pressure with a barrage of wind-based attacks, pushing Melia onto the defensive. But rather than being frustrated, Melia actually seems thrilled because this is the first time in ages someone's made him work for it. As Alec sends another blast his way, Melia pulls out a second sword and slices through the storm with a rapid flurry of strikes. He charges in, cleaving through Alec's spells as he rushes forward, a wide grin stretching across his face, until the second blade finally gives out and shatters under the force. Letting it drop, Melia thanks Alec for the experience, saying he only evolves when he's up against someone strong enough to truly threaten his life, and he wouldn't expect anything less from the disciple of Eldas. That name catches Alec completely off guard, so he quickly asks if Melia actually knew Eldas. Melia nods, saying he knows more than a little, and he's also aware that Alec's been hunting for him, but in his opinion, that search is a mistake. Maybe Eldas wants to be found, but Alec definitely isn't the one meant to do it. Melia guesses there's a lot Eldas kept from Alec, like the real story behind his mother's death. Alec probably grew up believing she died of some illness or plague, but Melia makes it clear that a woman like her wouldn't go down from something so trivial. Alec demands an explanation, but Melia just smirks and tells him the truth will reveal itself eventually. For now, he's had enough of talking. It's time to get back to the fight. He pulls out the dungeon core and starts drawing power directly from it, letting the energy surge through him until he successfully infuses his blade with its force. Now more fired up than ever, Melia's itching to find out how long Alec can keep that limit form going, because there's no way he can hold it forever. Elsewhere in the dungeon, Ornus is explaining Alec's limit break to the others. The form does let him freely wield all 5 elements, but the trick is that it turns his own body into a conduit for the overwhelming mana he's pulling in non-stop, so staying like that for too long comes with a price. Ornus tries to stand, determined to get to Alec's side, but his injuries are too severe, his legs give out, and he hits the floor. He's clearly not going anywhere anytime soon. Meanwhile, the remains of Gloria's corpse are still a threat, and there's a real possibility that he might come back. So Leviel calmly turns to the casket he brought and asks it to handle the situation. A bald dude who looks like Saitama then steps forward and places a coffin in front of Gloria's body, and with a flick of his hand, he activates it, dragging Gloria's remains into what can only be described as a nightmarish limbo. That should be enough to keep him from pulling any resurrection tricks, but down on the bottom floor, things are getting dicey. Alec might be a genius, but Leviel seriously doubts he can take on Melia by himself. Marbell questions if it's even worth worrying. After all, in wide open areas, mages like Alec usually have the upper hand. But Leviel shakes his head and says it's not that simple, because Melia likely has the dungeon core. And it might look like just another core, but unlike the standard ones that drop when you be a floor boss, The dungeon core is the literal heart of the entire place. Melee didn't get bumped up to S rank for no reason. He's the only guy in his so-called party, but he was promoted because he's strong enough to match a whole team on his own. He's a master with a blade, but he also knows how to use magic. And once someone absorbs a dungeon core, their mana gets cranked to ridiculous levels. So if Melee already got his hands on it, then Alex got a serious problem. Back below, Melee unleashes a devastating mana slash straight at Alec. Alec reacts fast and throws up a shield, but the blast is a hell of a lot stronger than he expected, and it crashes through the barrier almost instantly. Thankfully, Yora jumps in at just the right moment, throwing up a few extra shields that redirect the incoming blast. But Melee's not done, not even close. He keeps up the pressure with more slashes, and Yora tries to intercept them, while Alec makes a run for it, but she can't stop every single one. One attack breaks through her defense and slams into Alec, sending him flying backward. He's already worn out, and the toll from Limit Break is starting to pile up, so if this keeps going, he won't hold out much longer. Over by the sidelines, Olivia finally gathers enough strength to speak, and she lets the others know that Melee's current spell is Mana Blast. It's the only offensive spell he uses, but when he does pull it out, it hits like a truck. That said, she's got an idea, a strategy that just might work, but she'll need help to pull it off. Until then, Alec's on his own, and he's been running Limit Break for 5 straight minutes. His body's almost at its breaking point, and if he wants to survive this, he's going to have to figure out a way to take Melee out once and for all. Out of nowhere, Melee hurls another mana slash straight at Alec. Alec braces and throws up a barrier to defend himself, but he knows he can't keep tanking those forever. He has to do something about the dungeon core Melee is tapping into, but the non-stop attacks aren't giving him a single opening. Right then, Yora jumps in and burns the last of her mana to lock Melee down with several binding spells. Melee breaks out quickly, but the momentary delay is all Alec needs to charge up his next move. Alec unleashes a rapid-fire barrage of spells, dozens at once, filling the air with elemental magic, but Melee tears right through every single one without slowing down. Even when Alec fuses fire and lightning into a massive combined blast, the result is nothing more than a draw. It's clear that at this rate, Alec's going to run out of energy first. He's throwing everything he has, and it's not enough. Just then, Krasia calls out to him, saying she's got a plan. She reminds him of that time they were stuck inside the monster nest, where magic was completely sealed off by an anti-magic barrier, and now she's planning to recreate those same conditions. Alec immediately pulls out his sword, getting ready, so Melee fires off another mana blast. But before it can hit, Krasia casts her spell, forming an anti-magic field around them that makes the blast vanish before it hits Alec. With magic now completely cut off, only physical combat remains an option. Melee scowls, thinking this whole strategy is a mistake. Magic was the only thing giving Alec a fighting chance, so without it, he's just a second-rate swordsman trying to stand toe-to-toe with someone far beyond his level. Alec then pulls a healing potion from his jacket and drinks it, patching himself up. And with a steady hand, he lifts his sword and points it at Melee. He admits that one-on-one he wouldn't last, but he's not fighting alone. With his friends behind him, he believes they can still win this. He charges back in, trading blows with Melee again, clashing steel multiple times. But once more, Melee slips through and lands a clean hit across Alec's chest, sending him staggering. Melee doesn't look impressed. Watching Alec breathe heavily, he figures there's no more than a minute left before Limit Break gives out completely, and once it does, Alec's odds of surviving drop to 0. Alec knows he's running out of options fast, but then a memory flashes through his mind, one of Olivia's sword lessons during their escape from the monster nest. She had told him that if he ever wanted to fight with true precision, he needed to treat the blade like an extension of his own body, no wasted movement, no hesitation. And with that in mind, Alec tightens his grip and rushes back in to confront Melee head-on. Melee blocks Alec's first few strikes with ease, matching his rhythm, but when Melee swings in retaliation, Alec slips low under the blade and counters with a sharp upward slash aimed at his face. The strike lands, carving a shallow cut across Melee's cheek, but instead of anger, Melee just laughs. He tells Alec that he's far surpassed expectations, not only proving himself as a brilliant mage, but now holding his own as a swordsman too. Melee dives back in, eager to see what else Alec can do, but before he can reach him, Olivia dashes in and lands a clean cut right across Melee's chest. Caught off guard, Melee stumbles back in disbelief. Of all people, he never expected Olivia to land a hit like that. Olivia demands to know why he's done all this, why he raised her with such care, only to become someone she would have no choice but to hate. But Melee simply tells her that if she wants the truth, she'll have to take it from him by force. With that, both Alec and Olivia launch at him in unison, swords clashing from both sides. But even working together, their technique is still no match for Melee's, and Alec's body is already reaching its breaking point. The toll from Limit Break is finally catching up, and he can barely stay standing. Melee then raises his blade for the finishing blow, declaring the fight over until the anti-magic field suddenly shatters. The moment Melee senses the change, he realizes magic has returned. He quickly tries to cast a mana blast at Alec, but Yora throws up a barrier just in time, stopping his swing in its tracks. Alec uses the opening to fire off a powerful lightning spell. Melee endures the hit and prepares to retaliate, but before he can strike, Olivia jumps in and blocks his sword again, buying Alec just enough time to release a second lightning blast. Melee survives that too, refusing to go down, but in focusing so hard on stopping Alec, he fails to notice Krazia lining up her shot. The moment he turns toward Alec again, Krazia lets the arrow fly, sniping Melee cleanly from across the battlefield. And as Melee stumbles back, he smiles as he realizes that all of that shit was just a distraction and Krazia was the real threat. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap and are excited for the next episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our daily recaps.